Hey, sovereign wealth builders, Simon Dixon here, and welcome to another episode of Simon Dixon Hard Talk Live. We got lots to cover today. If you watched last week, you'll know that several of our predictions came true. So I hope it was useful, and we'll carry on analyzing to discuss what will be coming next. But the main episode that we're going to be discussing today, from the context of macro, from the context of geopolitical, and from the context of Bitcoin and tech, is we're going to be discussing, did AI end the Iran war? And of course, as always, in order to answer that, we're going to follow the money. And we'll go through what was announced this week and what we said last week and what we're expecting next. And so we're going to do that in part one. Part one, we're going to be doing and discussing, did AI become more important than wars? We will be going through everything that we need to go through in order to answer that question. And we did a format last week that I think some of you liked, which was we streamed this live, and then we went over to a premiere on YouTube of the next video. And in part two, which follows on from this theme, it was from an interview I did face-to-face on the Peter McCormack show. And really, we really focused on AI governments and the fact that we already have a private-public partnership governance structure using AI here already. And so part two is you can go over to YouTube, and we'll put a link below where you can watch the interview I did, where we answer the question, is the AI government already here? And so that's exactly what the theme of everything we're going to be discussing today. So let's jump right into part one. Did AI become more important than war? Well, not literally. So AI didn't necessarily end the war. But I do believe if everyone was around last week, you'll know that I said we're going to need a narrative of signing the MOU agreement that I believe has already been agreed, but we're looking for the perfect exit strategy, a Hollywood movie. More destruction that leads to more rebuild contracts. And we got that this week. But has it ended the war? Well, maybe there's more to go. So not literally, but we're certainly directionally going where I have been saying and where I've been predicting since 2023, where we're headed by following the money. So where did the AI capital cycle and the SpaceX and OpenAI IPO, Anthropic AI, and the liquidity needs become more important than the military-industrial complex and the continued escalation in the Middle East? And that's what we're going to be discussing today, because effectively that's what happened. So while everyone was saying we're going deeper and deeper into the escalation cycle, last week we were saying they need a clean day on Friday. And then that leads to a weaker narrative and then our Taco Tuesday or whatever we happen. But directionally, we're moving towards this deal because the world order has changed. And I won't repeat it. You can go through previous episodes. But last week, we really covered the AI bubble and what we need to think about it. And we said it's really going to kick off with this SpaceX IPO. And that is creating a ginormous capital relocation and a liquidity squeeze in all markets in order to suck up the hundreds and billions of dollars that are needed in order to invest in this. So we got the announcement of an Iran deal. Now, there's nothing special there. We've had about 39 of them, I think it was said. On, off is the complete narrative. But you can see that we had the framework of a 14-part deal again. But it was confirmed from both sides, and we get the usual escalation back and forth in terms of, is it happening? Is it happening? But no matter what, we clearly are moving forward to this deal. Now, most people think Israel rules the world, and therefore Israel's going to, hijack it. But remember, when you understand that Israel is simply a representative of the military-industrial complex, and Trump is aligned with the financial-industrial complex, then you'll know that Israel plays the role of bad cop, while Trump plays the role of good cop, while Iran plays the role in the IRGC of, escalation resistance until we get to a deal. And at the same time last week, we discussed the whole Bitcoin side and micro strategy and what that means and how all of the liquidity was being sucked out because BlackRock's Aladdin algorithm sucked out liquidity from the Bitcoin ETF and then to much of the AI structure. So let's jump straight in with understanding. We got a bunch of macro data. Are we moving directionally towards this whole fiscal dominant strategy? Well, if you remember what we've been saying on the macro side is that everything is being pushed into the stock market. The world reserve currency is being sacrificed in the dollar, and that's creating stress in the bond market. But the average cost on the US national debt is 3.3%. While now, if you refinance any debt, whether it be a short-term treasury or a 10-year yield or a 30-year, on the 30-year, you're looking at above 5%. That structurally is an impossibility. And the only thing you can do is fiscal dominance, where you print as much money as possible, manufacture inflation, and try and inflate away the debt by having these negative yielding bonds. But if the market doesn't like it, then foreigners start selling their bond. So whenever foreigners sell bonds, you get a correction in the price of the bond, which means that you need to have a higher yield, i.e. what interest rate do you pay on that bond in order to attract the new investors to pay the full price. And so as foreign investors are selling their bonds, you get an increase in this price, which increases the national debt. As you increase the interest on the national debt, that blows out the deficit. And if you get a decrease in tax collected, then this creates a bit of a doom loop where more people sell bonds, which increases more rates, and then you need an intervention from the Federal Reserve. But you need to manufacture inflation in fiscal dominance, which requires you to sacrifice world reserve currency. So what data did we get? Well, we got producer price index, PPI, which was 6.5%. That means that the input cost of goods is now, based upon this metric, 6.5%. That is the highest since November 2022, which was after the the escalation between Russia and Ukraine. And we had the oil crisis that led to the inflationary cycle that led to inflation in transitory. And then that broke the bond market that led to Peter Thiel manufacturing the bankruptcy of Silicon Valley Bank, that led to the justification for the Federal Reserve intervention. And this is now the highest we've been since September 2022. We also had CPI data, Consumer Price Index. Now remember, Producer Price Index is a basket of goods for the production of goods. And so later, the consumption of goods, the Consumer Price Index, is the PPI leads the CPI. And so the CPI is now above 4% again at 4.2%. And the only way to get that down in a fiscal dominance is to get a ginormous productivity increase. That productivity increase can only come from AI and robotics, and AI and robotics create structural unemployment. And so we're going to be going through how that plays out in the years ahead. Now we're in this AI bubble, and we got the SpaceX IPO, which isn't really a space company. It is an AI company. But now inflation is back above 4%. And so it never got to that 2% mark. I think we had 63 months above the 2% target. Interestingly, do you know where that 2% target comes from? Some people think it's like some economic concept, maybe Milton Friedman and the Chicago School of Economics and the monetarist side. It actually came from someone on TV in New Zealand saying inflation should probably be about 2%. And then the New Zealand Central Bank implemented that as policy. And then it became a policy globally around the Bank for International Settlements and the Federal Reserve. So it literally came from a TV show. And that is really theatrically how economics is, because it's sponsored from the top level in order to create these research papers that get out and make up the economic science. and justifies the policy from the corporate sponsors anyway. So as we know, that means that it's very problematic because inflation means higher rates on the bonds. Higher rates on the bonds accentuates that doom loop. Also, what happens with higher rates is it starts to impact the banking sector. Because now, if you want to mortgage and take out a mortgage rates are now above 7%. That is the big problematic area where you might need an intervention from the Fed, but you don't get an intervention from the Fed unless you can manufacture a crisis and a narrative in order to justify it. So this essentially, since 2020, we now have dollar purchasing power, which is down 30% just in the last 5 years, based upon all of that money printing. So if you were saving your money in fiat currency, and the best of them is the dollar, you've lost 30% of your purchasing power. At the same time, what does your bond yield be paying you? Nothing to compensate for that. So bondholders are taking a real negative yield, and that is set to continue. And so that's why we're getting these bond yields up, but that creates a problem with the national debt. And so that is why not the only thing we can do here is come up with a new mechanism for the banks or the Fed pushing yield curve control to get those yields down. And so bond yields are remaining elevated, and the war narrative is making it worse. So I've always said, follow the bond market in order to find out what Trump's going to announce. Because bondholders, when the 30-year yield is above 5% and the 10-year is above 4.5%, we've come slightly below that on the 10-year, which sets mortgage rates. And on the 30-year, we're still above that 5%. But the bond market remains the key signal here. And preceding every single recession is oil price spikes. And so when oil price spikes, you then need demand destruction in order to get prices down. Demand destruction means people stop buying because they can't afford it. And so if all the average consumer's money is going on energy, on mortgage, on interest, and on food, then you get demand destruction as the price of energy goes up. Producers have to pay more to get goods around. Everything is based upon energy, and then that eventually translates into consumer goods. And only the Fed can ultimately fix those yields. And they fix those yields by the Fed buying them when foreigners aren't buying them. But we're getting a movement from the traditional buyers. The petrodollar is dying, as I've covered with the UAE leaving OPEC. With the Japan carry trade, we had the ECB that hiked their rates. So Europe is hiking rates, and Canada is hiking rates. And now Japan's going to be hiking rates as well. That breaks the Japan carry trade as it breaks the petrodollar. And so you end up needing to issue countries like UAE FX swap lines so that they can create dollars through their own central bank, and you get these FX swap lines. And that's what's happening right now to stop people selling their bonds because you can't have yields go up. But in order to do that, you need the crisis. And so what is the crisis narrative we're getting? Well, I do believe that this AI bubble, even though AI is going to change the world, we're definitely in a pump and dump cycle. And so at some point, we need this big sell-off. Now, what's going to break that sell-off in order to justify the money printing? Well, we had big movements down. So the S&P started this week positively, and then we had big moves. Like, anyone that follows the S&P, movements of 1%, 2%. These are now $1 trillion moves, like $3 trillion moves. And so this week we had the S&P coming down as a result of the escalation. The NASDAQ was down. We had gold down as well. We had silver down with it. We had Bitcoin down with it. We had about $2.5 trillion wiped off the market in one day. And we get this jobs report. And this jobs report is saying that we've got another 172K jobs added. Now, where are those jobs? Now, when you look into it, these are not good things. Most of the jobs were added in healthcare and government. So that means that we had a correction, as a result. It takes a long time for the data to adjust to reality because we had tariffs, we had the structural as the Department of Government Efficiency, big layoffs within the government. We then had the reversal of tariffs, reversal of some of those decrease in jobs, and we're still getting some of the weird data from COVID as well, and the lockdown. So anyway, when your economy and your jobs are based upon young people working in healthcare to look after old people in an aging population, when more and more people are going to need access to their pension, that creates a liquidity squeeze. So there's demographic issues are very, very hard to reverse. That's why you had immigration, because the only way to solve that is you have immigrants that increase the tax base at the bottom so that you can have more tax revenue to look after the old, and you employ people in healthcare and government as well for that. But with the jobs in financial services, which is the vast majority of the US economy, 70% of it is service-based, 68% of that is consumption, and 50% of the consumption is from the ultra wealthy. The other 50% is from people that can't afford these prices. Then you have to have, these types of actions here. So jobs are being significantly cut in the crux of the US economy, which is technology and financial services. And many people are attributing artificial intelligence and robotics to that. And this is during the build-out infrastructure phase. Now, remember, with the AI, you've got to build out these ginormous data centers, but the chips that they're buying from NVIDIA that require rare earths from China and Taiwan and TSMC and South Korea in the different supply chains have been impacted by this oil and by this higher prices of oil. That investment needs to be made again. So you've got all of this liquidity that is being sent around Google, Oracle, NVIDIA. And that's why when we covered the China meeting, they needed to ensure that those supply chains are still intact. So Trump took the financial industrial complex, the technical industrial complex executives, and made sure that there's going to be no issue with Taiwan. And Xi Jinping set his terms and said, don't worry, Apple, you can still have your factories. Don't worry, Tesla, you can still have your rare earth minerals. But this is the world order now. You have to listen to me. And Gulf countries, and Iran, there are sources of energy. Now I've got the largest oil reserves in the world, and you're looking to export, so we can return back to buying some of your LNG and oil. However, we need you to exit the Middle East, and we need regional stability. And so what we've been witnessing is the transition towards a deal based upon effectively China and Russia supporting the military industrial complex in Iran. The Gulf countries having to have their exits in the region of the US military bases, and then a negotiation with the financial industrial complex for rebuild contracts and a movement towards that. That's why you have this on, off, on, off, on, off. You need the three-way exit narrative as well. But anyway, you can't lower rates when employment data is good and the economy is red hot and inflation is ripping or roaring or increasing. So how do you deal with that situation? Well, the reason that we're getting a bit of a correction in the market was because people were factoring that there isn't going to be a rate cut. There can only, in fact, be a rate increase. And a rate increase could cool down the whole economy. And so now we've got Kevin Walsh starting next week, which is the spokesperson for the banks, the same banks that own the Fed and the shareholders in the Fed. And as you increase its balance sheet, they get a 6% dividend off the balance sheet as well. And so really, we're pushing the debt interest up, which is increasing into this blowout cycle. And so we're getting this massive fiscal dominance where everything's going into stocks as a result of this inflation, where those holding fiat currencies are getting poorer and poorer and poorer. So growth can only come from productivity. And so this is why we flipped the entire chessboard of the world upside down for AI, as I've been covering years ago. before we even had, any of this October the 7th and this movements away, around understanding what's happening in the energy markets, this transition to LNG. So anyway, the market on the surface appeared strong, but when you dig into it, the Fed cut rate expectations are just significantly reduced now. And so if we get a rate hike increase, this is why you got to get those high valuations now. And we got to move into not just the SpaceX IPO, but the the ChatGPT IPO, OpenAI, and the Anthropic one as well, and all the ancillary ones that are happening around it as well. So anyway, we had the SpaceX IPO launch today. I'll give some more analysis on it. We're going to get through the first week. The price was launching. A lot of the data was happening around $135. I looked and it was trading about $129. You can't really read much into it until a lot later. But the SpaceX IPO, really what happens next here is everything, which is why we need to really, you can't look at the war situation without looking at the AI situation. And that's connected as well, because this is all about energy. When you get sanction relief in Iran, there's going to be 2 to 4 million new barrels of oil that come upon the market. Now, it won't be the same. And then we get also the GCC oil coming back. Now, that would be at lower prices, so that would create more demand. And that's the only way, to kind of get out of this bind. But the financial industrial complex only cares about these higher contracts, resetting the order. And that's why we're getting this on-off narrative all along. And so we've still got to see the supply chain issues that are going to be coming out during the next year or so that we've been covering as well. So what is the narrative? What is the situation right now? Well, the entire system, the dollar system, is betting upon this AI trade, this productivity increase as a result of unemployment. So we got to understand what that actually means. So the disaster that we're leading up towards that can justify the money printing, that is the only way of resolving this, is that private credit is the too big to fail narrative. So much of this data center build out was done upon private credit. Private credit is just individuals lending money at higher yields, but some of them borrow it from the banks. So it's connected to the banks, it's connected to the private equity side. Some of it happens via BlackRock and these different funds. We've had stress there. But that's the bailout mechanism because that connects it to the bank. So that gives you the too big to fail, socialize the losses and privatize the gains whenever it's needed. Now, the capital expenditure on these AI data centers is what's providing all the growth. So if you look at it, really, 50% of the S&P is the tech companies, which are all investing in this growth, and they're sending contracts, and they're doing it just like we saw during the 2008 financial crisis. They're doing it via SPV structures that sit off balance sheet, so they can sign contracts amongst each other in order to get access to that compute. And they're splitting them up, and we're getting a narrative that this is going to be paid for, Larry Fink said, by your pension, by Americans. And Trump saying, I'm meeting the AI executives in order to make sure that Americans get a stake in it, i.e., socialize the losses and privatize the gains. Because remember what these data centers are. The chips will be out of date in 3 years, and then you got to start again, and then you got to start again, and then you got to start again. And we already know that the cost of doing this in China is significantly cheaper. So why are we getting these high capex expenditures right now into record valuations while levering up and all the companies doing it on debt? Because they know there's going to be a bailout. That's that moral hazard. And they know they want to get the best valuations here. And so they wanted to include SpaceX in the S&P index so that you can get all of that pension fund money via the indexes, via BlackRock ETF, into the AI trade. And if they're going to bail it out, that bailout probably has to happen with some kind of stable coin backed by treasuries, that are going to be real loss making in terms of real inflation. And then that can calm down the inflation and try and get it back. But, inflating away the debt is the strategy here. So what does that require? Well, it requires a disaster that justifies the quantitative easing. But what is the goal here? The goal is most likely what AI produces. If you can have structural unemployment through AI and robotics, you can create the justification for this universal basic income. As Elon Musk would call it, a universal high income. And so, this is really what we need to watch out for. Now, the timing is impossible. I think I know that this is going to happen. We're getting the setup. I've sniffed this out. I've seen this before. But the timing will be the hardest part. And that affects everything. And so this is, we're starting to see kinds of, Broadcom is really exposed to this kind of, expansion. But it was expanding like crazy. And then the stock started falling into the narrative. We also started to see that Oracle is doing a 50 million debt and equity raise. We also saw that NVIDIA memory demand narrative is starting to weaken as well. We had a sell-off in the Korean markets, and South Korea is, massively skewed towards the AI trade as well. Same in Taiwan. TSMC, the market sold off significantly into this. We had the same real volatility, which again, the Taiwan stock market is heavily connected to TSMC, which is connected to China, which is connected to NVIDIA, which is connected to these IPOs. We had Intel, which needed government intervention. And now the government is saying, well, let's force it into potentially backup contracts with both Google and NVIDIA. And so they started reporting that they may be doing backup manufacturing via Intel. At the same time, Taiwan is starting to, those that are Western aligned, they might start building out the chips contracts in Arizona, while those that are China aligned and can see the future, they're starting to, build chip independence. And Taiwan, there's not enough thing they can do it. The silicon shield will eventually die. But chip independence is very important as we build this global technocratic one world corporate government that I covered in part 2, as a result of China negotiating with the technical industrial complex. So a lot of these deals are being done off balance sheet. What does off balance sheet mean? It means financial industrial complex. What does financial industrial complex? It means partnerships with sovereign wealth funds, which are funded by energy purchases from China, which means more influence from transnational capital. So this is really hiding the reality, and it's spreading the revenue. And that's causing these inflated numbers into these, AI valuations that have no reflection on reality. Now, don't get me wrong. The private equity, those early investors in the private equity and VCs, they're going to cash in. I think this is their exit. I think retail is that exit, which is why you're having such a strengthening of narrative. And once they've got that exit, they will rotate into other asset classes. That's why I think we started to see, the outflows of the Bitcoin ETF into this artificial intelligence. But Trump basically said that he's going to be meeting with the AI executives, which means you are the product. You're the one that's going to be buying this stuff. Now, we know that it requires significant reinvestment. So the private equity and the VCs, they're going to do very well. We may get a pump into good positive news around what's happening in Iran. That may create some liquidity as well at the same time. But we also know that we need the QE narrative. So it may be, and again, timing is the impossible part here, that they squeeze everything they can into the exit liquidity, manufacture the overvaluation narrative. Maybe China at the right strategic time does another DeepSeek story, as I've been covering in previous episodes. And then that creates the correction that justifies the print. And they get, those investors in these IPOs get wiped out if they weren't trading, they're the exit liquidity, and then the repurchases happen at the lower valuation, and the second round investors, the second wave, make all the money. Now, I'm not sure, I don't want you to trade upon this. My approach, I'll share with you what I do in these events. But I'm pretty sure the people in the middle right now are going to be the ones that get screwed if they end up holding the bag. And everything becomes timing, which drives you into speculation. And we all know how that ends. It's the insiders that win in the speculation game. So we are seeing the pension mortgage-backed security global dump via passing on through these institutional structures the global financial crisis 2008 narrative all over again with a new flavor. And it is this one. So Google is said that it's going to be spending almost $1 billion a month to gain access to data centers. And they've signed a contract with SpaceX. And so SpaceX is building it out. And there is so much demand for this compute because we're turning the whole world upside down for AI. And people are doing the most inefficient things. Like, it costs a lot of money to use AI in terms of the energy. And rather than using GPS, people are using travel with ChatGPT or their AI, which is burning significant energy. Why? These higher prices are cashing in for LNG companies and big oil. That's the higher prices are making more and more people bankrupt where they have to sell their assets, and concentration is going up as a result of this manufacture by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. But Google is saying we'll buy $1 billion of these AI data centers. And that was announced just before the IPO. So the AI liquidity squeeze is really creating this mortgage-backed security off balance sheet, circular economy of contracts in order to manufacture numbers so that you can justify the liquidity needs. So anyway, the SpaceX IPO is today. We'll see how it goes. We'll review it next week. The OpenAI IPO, they announced their filing, and the Anthropic IPO filing has already happened. That liquidity needs to be spread out. And we're getting this AI capital cycle accelerating, and it's going deeper and deeper into debt. And deeper into debt means that you'll lean into the too big to fail private credit banking markets as well. So as we said, everything that's being spent right now will be worthless in 3 years. So you've got to spend again, and that needs to be factored into the equation. So the main question that I have when we need to think about this, what does this actually mean? What does this mean for you? What do we need to prepare for? What can we draw into this ahead? Well, do fund managers need to call existing assets and sell those existing assets in order to invest into the next AI cycle? What is the capital rotation? And is that what we're seeing right now? Well, I think it is, which means that the capital rotation may come back into other assets. And so we've got to keep an eye on that. And the way we keep an eye on that is by following ETF flows, as I covered last week. So, but we also need to think about how do we manage what's going to come as a result of AI, as a result of these massive productivity increases. Who's going to benefit from it? Who's going to make the money from that? Is it going to concentrate? Who's going to get that productivity? So Trump says that the market should be green when it started crashing. And so the market turned around based upon market saying that it should be green. We got the announcement with Iran, obviously. And Jensen from NVIDIA says that everyone needs to buy the dip when it came down. So we're getting these announcements that's trying to drive this market manipulation and really just have a soft landing narrative. But have no doubt, we are in an AI bubble and these valuations don't reflect reality. And AI is going to change the world. And so what do we do with that? Well, we're being told that we're going to get abundance, which is going to be universal high incomes. Because universal basic income, really, I thought through this long and hard, is the only way to solve it. And yeah, we call it a universal basic income, but really, let's face it, we have this unemployment benefits, a dole, whatever you want to call it. But if we do enter into this world where people are on a universal income, probably paid by stablecoins, probably algorithmically integrated with your social credit score and your artificial intelligence spending behavior. But are we going to be in an abundant world? Because what does AI do, really? It puts the cost of everything down. And so it is incredibly deflationary at the same time as this fiscal dominance inflation. So you've got these offsetting forces of money printing, creating inflation, AI creating productivity and deflation. And so what does that mean? What that means is wealth redistribution, because AI makes production cheaper. So it makes it cheaper to produce goods, PPI, not CPI. AI does not automatically make people richer. It does make producers richer. So those are the producing things. And it does make those that own the assets that get the market timing right richer as well, around the pump and dump cycles. So ownership matters. This is why I've been saying all along, the only way to beat this cycle is to own assets, because fiat currencies are being destroyed as the world reserve currency, the dollar, is sacrificed to enter into this multipolar world that FIC is engineering with transnational capital, while building this, Orwellian, technocratic, global artificial intelligence, technical industrial complex led global market. So the Magnificent Seven is really where revenue already, we can look to that, right? They're the ones using the AI because they're building the AI. And they're the ones that are doing, if you look at the job data, all the unemployment. And so revenue per employee is rising. So that means by creating unemployment and increasing productivity, you're bringing in more revenue, more profit, more productivity per employee. So that will be reflected in share prices. So we're concentrating wealth. And remember, 10% own 92% of all the stocks. And so if the higher prices is, leading to people needing to sell their assets ahead of this, and then we get a decrease in prices as a result of this productivity, is that going to make people richer overall? Well, you will be given enough income to just keep alive the consumption, because if everyone's getting unemployed, what is the UBI? The UPI is effectively giving you enough money to continue consuming so that the revenue can increase into the very companies. So this is massive concentration into the wealth of those that own the assets. And you can compare that. So if you compare the Magnificent Seven, where the revenue per employee is going up, take a broader index like the Russell 2000, revenue per employee is falling. So if in the general sense, revenue per employee is falling in the general sense, and it's going up in the Magnificent Seven, then that's the story. The stock market is not at all-time highs. The tech companies, the AI bubble, the fiscal dominance, the MIC tick, military industrial complex, technical industrial complex, financial industrial complex, are redistributing, and this is the asset stripping phase that I've always talked about. And we got a little bit of, they'll install some AI regulation. Now, people think, the companies don't want regulation, is useless. The AI regulation is to build a moat. It always has been in financial services. And so that's to stop people competing. Whether it will work or not, we've got a very different technology. But it's incumbent protection, always has been. Do the crime, pay the fine. Only the large companies that have regulatory capture can do that. And so regulations is a moat in order to keep out competition. So surveillance will expand. And that's why these trends, nothing, is irreversible. So UBI is the likely outcome as a result of this. It's the only outcome I can think of. And it's the one that I think ties in with fiscal dominance and this technocratic control grid that's being built. So What does this mean for you as the average person? Now, if you don't own assets, it means consumption support. You receive enough money just to consume when you're unemployed. And you can think about it: unemployment, a benefit, a dole, whatever you want to call it. That's we have this all around the world already, but it's just about to get more extreme. This is what I was covering last week. Remember SICK, the subscription industrial complex? Hey, by the way, thanks in the comments for all the feedback on that. I was also thinking of another word, subordination industrial complex, because really all of these subscriptions, debt, everything is about really building up a subordination complex. And I think UBI is one of those examples, is to make you subordinate to the UBI and control the spending and everything. So what do you think about subordination industrial complex? Maybe I'll start using that. So we got MIC, military industrial complex, FIC, financial industrial complex, TIC, technical industrial complex, and SIC I was playing with it. Last week I said subscription industrial complex, but I think it's subordination industrial complex, control of food supplies, control of interest, debt, equity, various other things. Anyway, let me know in the comments what you think. But this is the people that don't own the assets, and they want you to not own anything. You will own nothing and be happy. The World Economic Forum agenda here. The AI machine can effectively produce enough for everyone globally, the entire population. But will it be distributed that way? And that is really the question. Who owns the machine? Who owns the AI machine? And so as part of this pump and dump cycle, if this is the overvaluation, if the VCs are exiting into this bubble, now there'll be lockup periods, 30, 60, 90 days, all this stuff. And we're going to watch out, and I'll give commentary. I'll be the first to say, I can't figure out the timing on this, and the timing matters, obviously. But who's going to own the AI machine? If the VCs and everyone's exiting there, then we get the capital rotation. Then we get the narrative that pumps into the second wave investor. Maybe you need a crash in between. Then that second wave investor is going to own the machine because they're going to buy back cheaper. And they're the ones that are going to get the too big to fail, private credit, socialize the losses, privatize the gains. So you got to be careful here. And you have to own the assets at the end of it. And we're really moving towards this world, this bifurcated world, control grids. And I'll cover that more in the crypto, stablecoin, Bitcoin story as well. But AI abundance is being sold as a story about cheaper goods. And so really, I do believe that this makes everything cheaper. If the input costs, the PPI, we had this pump and now we're going to get everything cheaper, and this drives the cost down and down and down, then really everything should get cheaper. And the real question is, it's kind of not whether things become cheaper. It's really who owns the assets that benefits from this economy, and who owns the assets producing the cheaper goods. And I think that's the question. I think that's what everyone needs to adjust to. Because approximately in this AI trade, about 200 years, productivity gains have kind of flowed back to workers because businesses still need labor. And that's why you had trade unions. And that's why you had labor negotiations. And always inflation has been above the wage increases since we had globalization and labor lost more of its power. But as labor loses more and more of its power, workers have been able to kind of gain from this productivity increase alongside the capital. And AI changes that equation because effectively, what does it do? It automates the worker itself. So we're automating the worker. And so the wage that once kind of flowed towards labor as a result of productivity increases, this remains with the owner and the asset owner and the capital. It remains as profits, which means higher valuations, higher profits, because you're sinking your costs. The production costs are sinking here. So AI is not really just another productivity tool. It's not the same as previous productivity, where the tractor comes along and now the farmer no longer needs to, use the hoe in order to do it manually. Is potentially, and potentially, this is narrative, and I think it will be, the first technology that basically automates general purpose human intelligence. And that's the pitch we've been given. Now, that could be a pitch, but I think we're starting to see it. If you're not using AI, you're falling behind. You're not productive. And so previous technical revolutions, they kind of replaced specific jobs and replaced it with another job. AI replaces the ability to remain in, to retain the next job. I think that's different. And guess what? All the people that don't want you to know this, that are raising billions into AI, the Jeff Bezoses of the world, the Elon Musks of the world, they're selling you a utopia. So this kind of, let's look at what the optimistic case here is. The optimistic case is that, okay, we end up with lots of productivity, lots of new jobs, and these new jobs appear. Is that really going to happen? Well, the job data says that it's the government and healthcare and financial services and tech and the engines of growth is not producing the jobs, and they're not reappearing. There was also manipulation of the data in that they are using job postings. And apparently the rate at which job postings lead to hiring is going down as well. So the burden of proof is now really explaining what those jobs are. And if anyone can tell me, please do say in the comments, what are those new jobs? Because I can't see them. And that's really the optimistic case. So maybe this is massive productivity and it leads to new jobs. But the largest beneficiaries are not the workers. The largest beneficiaries are certainly the owners. And so you either need to have a strategy around that to own assets, or you get crushed. And so, and you've got to get the market timing right as well because of this inherent nature. So those that own the AI companies, those that own the compute infrastructure, those that own the semiconductor companies, those that own the data platforms, those that own the energy infrastructure, and those that own the capital itself, i.e. the FIC, are the people that are going to be the net beneficiaries. So the AI booming is creating one of the most greatest concentration of ownership in modern history. And if we add a pump and dump cycle in another 2008 style event, that's what I think we're being led up to. And this is the game that everyone needs to get ahead of. So the wealth transfer is really not from like poor countries to rich countries. It's from labor to capital. And that's what I think AI does. That's what I think the wealth transfer is. It's from labor to capital. It's from workers to those that are the asset owners. It's from the wage earners to the shareholders. And the compensation that people get out of this is that AI makes consumption cheaper. So if everything gets cheaper, then the worker will be able to afford more. But it does not make ownership cheaper because the assets are going up and up and up. And that's the fiscal dominant structure. So that is that consumption's getting cheaper. You end up with a universal basic income if you haven't prepared for this, which makes sure that the consumption continues for those that own the shares and the capital. But those that own the infrastructure are the ones that are going to be the net beneficiaries here. So you may be able to afford like a better AI doctor, for example. The cost of hiring a doctor may get significantly cheaper as a result of this. You may be able to afford better AI teacher. Maybe all universities go open. I think that's going to happen. You may be able to afford a significantly better AI assistant to do a lot of your work for you. But what's not getting cheaper? The house, the land, the shares, the equity, and all of the productive assets, they're going to get harder and harder to own, which is why you need a strategy for this. And so one thing that I've always said is buy Bitcoin into weakness in self-custody. Whenever the price goes down, you get more Bitcoin for your fiat currency. And then this fixed supply asset may mean that you end up in a longer term strategy of being able to buy your assets, buy your house, if they go up at a faster rate, which historically they always have done. And now we're getting weakness into this AI narrative, capital rotation, a lower Bitcoin price, which allows you to either buy more Bitcoin with your fiat currency, or you're a great capital allocator and you're able to pick exactly the right place to be and you're in these AI trades, or maybe you're doing a combination of the two. Again, I like to boycott the system with Bitcoin, but I understand that people may have to play with the system to beat the system in order to be in a position to do the capital rotation. So assets are going to become harder and harder to own as a result of AI. Now, couple that with tokenization, where they won't even let you own the asset. They want the custodian to own the asset and you to own the token. And you've got these structural paper contracts where they don't want you to own the Bitcoin. They want you to own the paper Bitcoin. So daily life gets cheaper, but ownership gets more expensive. And that's what I think we're witnessing. That's the trend that I'm looking out for. And that's what I think the data is. This is the hidden wealth transfer. So the headlines during this whole thing will say to you, everything's getting cheaper. AI is making everyone's life better. You now have universal basic income. You don't need to work. But it is a wealth transfer between those different things that are happening. And so the middle class was effectively built upon ownership. That was the boomers after World Wars that were able to get the real estate at an affordable rate. They were able to leverage up the debt. They own the property. They own the businesses. They own the stocks. They have the savings. And AI essentially threatens to separate consumption from ownership. And that's what I think everyone needs to prepare for. So citizens may consume more, but they'll be owning less if they don't get this trend right, if they don't become the asset owner. And that is really the universal basic income, or what Elon Musk calls the universal high income. It doesn't solve the problem. It concentrates wealth significantly. And that's why I've always said you got to have a plan for the next 5-10 years. Even if it takes longer, takes shorter, whatever it is, you still got to start working. I talked about, there was an episode on my blog, simondixon.com, how to develop a 10-year plan, how to understand these different trends. But UBI is effectively consumption support. Let's call it what it actually is. And ownership is wealth creation. And you need to become an owner rather than a consumption supporter. It's going to be the subordination industrial complex, the subscription industrial complex. Basically, a monthly payment is not the same as owning the productive assets. You don't get more productive and get ahead unless you get more productive and then own the assets. And that's why you got to lean into this maximum productivity increase in order to spend less than you earn and invest the difference in the assets, own more Bitcoin this month in the sovereign strategy, and then diversify accordingly in order to play some of the different things. Now, remember, the future may become a world where citizens rent access to virtually, all sorts of things. And so really that is the subscription industrial complex. They want you to rent it rather than own the assets, and specifically the assets that are producing it, because that's why they create these manufactured crises to make sure that you own nothing and you're happy. That is it. You will own nothing. Excuse me. We will price you out of the assets and you'll be happy because you've got the universal basic income, which will be programmatic money, which will be the one global governance structure. So the most important question of the AI area really is not how intelligent will AI become. I think the most important question is who owns the intelligence. That's the important part. It's an ownership story. So can we make it decentralized? That's what we did with Bitcoin. We made it decentralized. Nodes enforced the rules. There was no centralized server, a largest distributed supercomputer in the world, and the code was open source, so people could audit it. And people could verify their own transactions, own their own value, and send it peer-to-peer with everyone else in a decentralized way. Can we do that with AI? That's really the question. And we cover that in part 2 with my interview with Peter McCormack. So every major technological revolution created new billionaires. AI may create, and I think it already is creating, the first trillionaires that are publicly known. There's probably trillionaires already. But the first trillionaires that are publicly known. The abundant story is real. This will make things very abundant. But the ownership story is what really determines your future and who benefits from this. Because if you don't own the assets, again, I'll keep repeating. And this is why I keep coming back to the same theme in every episode. Because we have to follow the money to understand the big macro trends so we can then develop the micro strategies. And in the AI era, ownership matters more than labor. And that's what the adjustment everyone needs to make. And I did cover that in the 10-year plan. So which is why I think basically Bitcoin becomes increasingly more important in that era, despite the fact that it's on the wrong side of the capital rotation, which means you get to buy more Bitcoin with your fiat currency if you got a longer term strategy. And that's why Wall Street wants your Bitcoin. That's why they're manufacturing these price corrections and centralization strategies. So AI is concentrating the ownership of intelligence, and Bitcoin remains one of the few assets that allows the ordinary person to own a piece of the future rather than simply consume it. And so that's why Bitcoin as store of value versus Bitcoin as medium of exchange is the important preservation, which is why we always fought for cheaper nodes, so that anyone can run a node, you can have your freedom, and then you can spend your Bitcoin as you choose. But that's the game changer. So we, I believe, are in the AI pump and dump cycle and is being engineered in order to concentrate ownership into fewer and fewer hands. That's the story of the post-1971 era, since the dollar came off the gold standard. Whether it be long-term capital management, whether it be the global financial crisis, whether it be COVID, whether it be the Russia-Ukraine war, whether it be the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, manufactured crisis that engineer concentration of wealth upwards so that you will own nothing and move towards this technocratic happy. So that's what I think it is. So timing is the hard part, as I said. Dollar cost averaging is the equalizer, by the way, and that has always been the solution. Not trying to time the market, but I've always said own more Bitcoin this month. You can apply that to own more gold this month. You can apply that to own more of the AI infrastructure each month, and you can apply it to all of those. But spend less than you earn, invest the difference in assets, build a sovereign strategy, build your self-custody strategy, and then you can purchase the living assets based upon being on the right side of this massive wealth transfer. And it's only debt and leverage that can make it where you don't end up with the assets because you use it as collateral. You get wrecked, you get margin called, you over speculate on derivatives or perpetuals, you borrow against your Bitcoin, you end up buying a treasury company, you do it through micro strategy, you don't get the upside because you're doing it through stretch, you end up, not receiving that dividend, all the things I covered last week. So let's tie that into the announcements now and the MOU and try and get some of the timing right, because it's difficult. So last week I predicted my longer term thesis that the MOU and the deal has already been done, but it would be announced around liquidity needs for the financial industrial complex. And we got that. We got that like clockwork. People were saying to me, yep, it happened that way. Others, you can criticize, whether I get the timing right, but this one I got right. the strategy has never changed. My long-term trajectory of this, as more information becomes available, I realize that we're in acceleration here. We're doing more at a faster pace than I imagined would be done. I thought this would take a longer time. But did AI end the Iran war? That's a question I want to come back to. So what actually happened this week? Well, we had another escalation theater. Some people were thinking, this is it, World War III. Others are my long-term listeners. They kind of sit back and they know what's going to come next. We don't know the exact thing, but they know that there's a narrative that Israel rules the world. Israel is bad cop. They're connected to the military industrial complex. The bribes there are to profiteer from war. That's connected to laundering money back into good cop, which is the US. And the US is captured by the financial industrial complex. And underneath the FIC is the MIC and TIC, the technical industrial complex, the subordination industrial complex. Underneath that, they try and make sure you own nothing and be happy. They're building the technocratic global governance structure. They need China in order to build that. Transnational capitals providing the capital, like the Gulf countries. And the FIC is using your pension, your insurance, your endowments to pull together all the money so that you own the debt and you become the bag holder as well in your pension. And US needs a way of plausible deniability. It's not us. It's because Iran forced us through. It's the Epstein network, even though the Epstein network goes back to the deep state and the military industrial complex. And it's the funneling off of the debt and transferring wealth over to the asset holder and the shareholder. Now, Iran plays the resistance narrative. Underneath that, there is genuine resistance. I want to go through a few things because people get confused about this. But that story is still shaping out. You get the Israel and Iran, strategic tension that justifies all the wars for all the decades and everything I've covered previously. Not going to go through it again. But anyway, so Israel strikes Iran. So that plays into the narrative that it's not America. We didn't know about this. This is Israel making us, dragging us into making shitloads of money out of war. It's those pesky, just Israel on their own. And yeah, we get that, we everything they're doing is evil, evil, evil in terms of the death, the genocide, everything, humanitarian hat on. I'll never forgive what is being done there. But we know where money comes back to. It comes back to the TIC testing their technology for military profits so that the FIC can pump the stock market and transfer wealth and build out this multipolar world as also this global technocratic governance structure. So anyway, Iran strikes back, and the Iran strikes, they just happen to be missiles that launched at US bases in Jordan, which leads to a new rebuild contract in Jordan, which hasn't been targeted yet. We get the same in Bahrain, and apparently in Bahrain that targeted American fighter jets and various other things. We also get some escalation in Iraq, and we get the same in Kuwait. So all of those were strategic assets, which are essential for the forever war in the Middle East, which means that this is the exit of the forever war model, providing that the FIC can get contracts led by the Gulf countries that is funded by China to turn the Middle East back into West Asia, as we get this so-called trade war where all of the executives of the FIC, MIC, and TIC meet in Beijing, where Xi Jinping agrees to provide them with all the rare earth minerals and components and cheap labor. And we have this transition that requires weakening the dollar and removing the dollar as world reserve currency, while Trump being a populist leader with a MAGA narrative of we're doing it to rebuild the manufacturing base, when really they're just building AI and robotics. So the MIC forever war model, as I've always said, needs to be replaced with rebuild contracts for the financial industrial complex in partnership with transnational capital. So Israel needs to be weakened as well. Israel has been more and more privatized. The only port that hasn't been targeted by Iran is the one owned by India, because Iran and India have a partnership. We got the taking out of key assets within UAE. We also got an understanding after this that $3 billion have been transferred. Remember, I told you that Iran and UAE work together in the sanctions circumvention infrastructure, and that UAE has built out the network of central bank digital currencies by Enbridge that plug into the China SIP system and the China CBDC. And that they play both sides. They normalize with Iran so that they can acquire assets. Normalize with Israel so that they can acquire assets that are being privatized into the Abraham Accords, which means that the GCC becomes effective controllers. Then you have a good cop, bad cop between UAE and Saudi. UAE acquires the assets as bad cop, and then Saudi is good cop, and they get to be the holdout and say Palestine won't happen until no normalization will happen until there's a Palestinian state. The more the GCC acquire assets in Israel, the more they control Israel, the more US gets to exit, which weakens Israel. And then you get the Palestinian state, but it needs to be negotiated with the relevant powers. And those powers and Iran and Saudi were normalized via China. And China doesn't want Israel to be a MIC asset. It wants regional stability, and so do the Gulf countries. So you need a theater in order to manage that transition when you're dealing with the MIC terrorists here. Okay, so Israel then goes back to targeting Beirut and striking in Lebanon. Lebanon provides the cover for Israel as the Iran deal is negotiated. And so we get this on-off based upon whether Lebanon is included. In the meantime, Hezbollah is being weakened by airstrikes from Israel, and Israel and the IDF are being weakened via ground infiltrations. And whenever Israel kills civilians for MIC and infrastructure, the terrorist state for MIC, they always do civilian targets so that the resistance has the retaliation. And then you get that strategic weakening, which is what we're seeing at the moment, that then leads into another track, which is the integration of Hezbollah into Lebanon that I've been talking about, as we had with Houthis signing an agreement with Saudi in Yemen, and then also the border peace, Gaza with Hamas. And the more weakening of Israel, the better those terms get. The longer this take, the better terms go towards the GCC. And so we get this painful, humanitarian disaster of trying to expel the terrorists from the region. And by terrorists, I mean Israel and the US MIC. The resistance, it needs to go through this integration process, and that's what we've been, I believe, witnessing. So Trump now says they won't get involved in Lebanon as a result of that, trying to separate the tracks. Trump later then announces that there's going to be a retaliation. There was a massive amount of strikes around strategic targets in Iran. Those all need rebuild contracts. And the deal that was leaked, and it was leaked again in the New York Times, said that Trump says the deal, it gets leaked in New York Times. And then Trump comes out and says the deal remains on track, leading into the SpaceX IPO. So then we have a bit of a narrative, a bit of a theater, again, good cop, bad cop, between Trump and Netanyahu. This is a theater where effectively Trump gets to say, I call the shots. Netanyahu will do as I say. That's for MAGA, for US audience. Trump then comes out and says the deal will continue despite the strikes. Netanyahu comes out and says, these are our terms. That's in Hebrew for Israelis, for the radical Zionists, so that it can maintain into the next election cycle, leading into the regime change that I think we're going to have in October within Israel. And negotiation continues. Now, I'm not ignorant enough to say this is it. Allegedly, there's going to be an MOU signed in Europe, and it's going to be called the Islamabad Accords. Maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't. We definitely get this liquidity cycles, but directionally the deal will be done. I can't predict all the bits in between, and it's irrelevant as well. But you can see the framework of the deal: sanction relief, 300 billion investment fund. Now, remember what I said. Everyone, they were framing that as reparations. I said that would be a fund. That would be contracts that would be signed. So, the strikes, it was said that won't stop negotiations. We'll see. But directionally, you can see where this is headed. So remember what I said right back on day one. When I went on those early podcasts, I said, we're witnessing a managed transition which has bounded escalation between FIC and MIC based upon China's normalization between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and based upon America now transitioning to being an energy exporter, particularly with LNG, that requires AI inputs. And this is about nuclear weapons as a front narrative, but it's really about nuclear energy. That was my long-term thesis before any of this. So my framework is that Trump answers to FIC, as I've always said, in case you're new to this. I got a lot of new subscribers. Netanyahu answers to MIC. And the question is, did Wall Street need a deal while the MIC needed escalation? So the FIC wants regional stability, but it owns the MIC as public companies. So it makes money from all the bombs, all the different type of thing. But the MIC needs escalation in order to gain more power. And that's connected to the radical Zionists, which needs the death to America, death to Israel narrative that I've covered in order to justify the war that allows for the trillions of dollars to be laundered through and back into the US stock market. So for me, this is just portfolio management for a company like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, and the FIC. Iran has destroyed more and more of the US bases now. That leads to new agreements. Israel has, basically cleared some of the strategic routes in Lebanon that are going to be needed for these different type of ports, and this different new order and these different routes. That's happening in Gaza, in Iraq as well. That's happening. And then the US is destroying Iranian infrastructure for the rebuild. The Gulf is going to provide the capital, the China's Belt and Road Initiative, and there'll be a framework that puts FIC in its place, but compensates it for regional stability as well. But the main terms are set by China, because the US FIC and MIC and TIC need access to all of that trade. And so they get their rare earth minerals, they get their cheap labor in factories, and the condition from China is hands off Taiwan. So they both work on becoming chip independent. Russia gets Ukraine with some FIC contracts. FIC gets oil and LNG that resets the world order through the Strait of Hormuz and insurance contracts. MIC gets war compensation through European Union, through more access to resources for FIC via Venezuela. SpaceX, gets its IPO into a decent narrative. And that's kind of where we are now, today on Friday. And so the IPO needs to continue. There's going to be a lot more liquidity that's needed into this. I've already said we got the OpenAI nodes. It needs a significant, confidence into that IPO. Anthropic needs significant confidence, rather. And the bond market is under pressure, and it needs quantitative easing. So you need to pump this for as long as you can, knowing that you're going to socialize losses and privatize the gains. So you have basically created the 2008 moral hazard that I talked about. So the final Hollywood movie may be built around these IPO cycles in a big print. We may have seen it, but I'll keep reviewing as well. But you got to keep following the money. So who are the potential winners in this? Well, as I said, FIC would win over MIC. MIC represents the Greater Israel Project. The different narratives in Iran as well that US manufactured, like, the Khalifa and the Shia supremacist type of taking over Islamic State type of stuff that provides the cover story. But it's going to be the technical industrial complex. It's going to be the financial industrial complex. And it's going to be the reconstruction contracts, which I believe are going to be paid for, and not just paid for, but invested by the Gulf Sovereign Wealth Funds, the BRICS development banks, Belt and Road Initiative. And what I wanted to do is, before we get into the Bitcoin part, I saw a post which I really liked from an account that I follow, Evan Writes on X. And it went through a bit of the history of Iran as the useful enemy. Now, people get very upset with this because all of their ideology comes in, and there is genuine crimes against humanity here. But in my follow the money narrative, I have to take off my humanitarian hat, as I often have, and become inhumane, realpolitik. Analyze things as they are, not as I want them to be. If they were as I want them to be, it would be completely different. But if you think back, and this is what the post went through, there's two ways that the Mick, Fick, and Tick can think about this. You can either have a friendly Iran, which means that you get one arms contract. That's how this whole mess started. You know, the Shah was doing a $1.7 billion contract. And it's pretty boring. Doesn't make that much money when there's tens of trillions of dollars to be made from war. So you can have a hostile Iran. Now, under a hostile Iran, what did the MIT get? It got 50 years of arms contracts. It got negotiation with all the Gulf countries. It got the Gulf bases as a result of the petrodollar. The petrodollar was as a result of the assassination of King Faisal that led to the Yom Kippur War from Israel, that led to the oil embargo that made a lot of money for the oil producers. And then there was an agreement to price it in dollars, the petrodollar, hold those funds in US treasuries, and the yield on the US treasuries would go back into the military industrial complex that would lead to building the base that would protect the petrodollar. And then you get an infiltration by the CIA, Mossad, MI6, and subordination contracts that you have to fight against. And so Saudi said, if we can't beat them, buy them. And so they started building their sovereign wealth fund. And then that started being funded more by China as China grew, as it had globalism. And then Saudi would get more and more influence and eventually get some of their guys, like the CEO of Saudi Aramco, on the board of BlackRock. So now they can be a part of the portfolio management. Then you get to set terms and you can demand a Palestinian state, while Iran creates the resistance, which fuels the profits of the MIC, but also creates negotiation power. And then when China normalized between Iran and Saudi, you now got resistance that creates negotiation power in terms of MIC. Then you have FIC nodes through transnational capital. And then you can take on the colonizers, the US, Israel. And then you can buy Israel into Abraham Accords, and you can bribe the President Trump through affinity partners, which is funded by Saudi so that Trump makes money into all of these deals. And then Jared Kushner can compensate the radical Zionists into this reality that requires more privatization. And I think that's the strategy. You also get fleet deployments if you do it this way. You get weapon sales continually. And you get permanent military pressure, trillions and trillions of dollars. There's always the justification for more war. You manufacture a fake war on terror, and then you can weaponize all the religions in order to, radicalize Zionists through lobby pressure. And you can have a cover story for this profiteering and money laundering. You get the petrodollar that replaced, the gold standard that was propped up by, the IMF system. And that's why you end up with the status quo. So there are powers within the IRGC that benefits from the status quo. There are the forces that lobby Israel that benefit from war and status quo. There are the previous boomers that were radicalized into the evangelical Christian neocon narrative that are funded by AIPAC and military and financial that benefit from the status quo. And this is the transition that we're witnessing, that I've been covering. The de-radicalization, the changing of the narrative, the acceptable resource, the divorce, the plausible deniability. And so what when Evan wrote that post on the history of Iran, is basically saying that Arachi, so what I've been saying about Arachi is that Arachi was in the negotiations before, was in the negotiations now, is in the negotiations after. And all those that were in the negotiations were the people that are still alive today that are driving the process. But the negotiations from Iran's side are really going to drive Iran into the system, but on China's terms rather than fixed terms. And that requires this type of theatrical managed transition. And really, Arachi is performing the role of the Shah, but I think it's more multipolar aligned. And that is reflective into the new multipolar world order. And that's why the worst Iran is off financially, the fund will be used in order to rebuild, but also it pushes Iran deeper into China. And then you get this, this reset of the world order accordingly. Because China doesn't want Israel as a Greater Israel project, destabilizing the region. But they don't PR things. They don't press things. They do things effectively. But if we go back in history, there were some declassified documents, and I wanted to corroborate the story. So I looked into them. And there were BBC Persian basically reported in 2016 that there was a declassified US diplomatic cables that revealed effectively contracts between Khamenei, after the revolution, not Khomeini. I get those wrong ways sometimes. And now we've had, the different Ayatollahs, and obviously we had the decapitation campaign. But the original at the 1979 revolution, Khamenei's circle, through these wires that were released, were, communicating into the Carter administration. And this was before the 1979 revolution. And he was in exile in France at the time, and many people believe that that might have been an MI6 op. Khamenei was reportedly in these declassified documents, and I went through them, basically reassured Washington and the Carter administration that the American interests in the Iran world would not be threatened under the new government. Now, one could say, well, this is back then. Maybe things have changed. But according to these declassified communications, Khamenei's camp basically indicated that the oil would still continue flowing and that American interests would be protected, and that the transition of power could occur without any military intervention. And so Khamenei got reassurance from America that this transition could happen and that there would be no military intervention to overthrow the Shah with the Iranian Revolution and end up where we are today. So Khamenei, in these documents and declassified documents, you could say, well, maybe they're games, maybe not. But reportedly communicated, basically, you will see we are not in any particular animosity with the Americans. And these were the communications. There was a general report, and this was that General Robert Heiser, in the document, was sent to Tehran and was doing basically the final days of the Shah's rule. This was during the final days of the Shah's rule, and later became central to basically the debates over whether Washington would discourage any of the military interventions and the coups that could happen that could have preserved the Shah and not allow the Iranian Revolution to happen, not allow this monarchy and this theocratic structure that emerged. And so those negotiations were all declassified into the documents, and you can look these up as well. But the traditional narrative that came across, after this was that America lost Iran because the Shah was an ally of America and a puppet, no doubt about it. But he started to go off on his own track as well. And so what could the MIC do in order to alleviate the fact that America may be losing Iran? And you can see that the Shah towards the end, they had all this pro-Palestinian side, was revealing things about Israel and control over media. And you see those infamous clips as well. But the alternative interpretation, if you read these documents and then you understand operations like Operation Gladio by Paul Williams, and you understand the Iran-Contra affair and stuff, is that America chose not to save the Shah because a hostile Iran was more useful than an independent Iran. Going through the framework that I said, you either have one contract or you have 50 years of hostility, which led to trillions of dollars of money laundering and profiteering from war. Now, you can just align incentives. It doesn't need to be a grand conspiracy to see how aligned incentive and covert operations. Remember, these things happen by infiltrating at the top. It doesn't mean that everyone's in the grand conspiracy. Most people don't know who they work for because they don't follow the money. And so a friendly Iran would lead to regional stability, which is less profit, less debt, less profits for MIC and FIC. And so fewer military deployments, fewer arms contracts, and basically less jurisdiction for the permanent military presence that America needed to destabilize the region, which is why you need something like the Greater Israel Project to destabilize the region. Plausible deniability, siphon off and justify the contracts. Israel gets to build this criminal state, and you get to radicalize and recruit an army that commit crimes against humanity and then test the technology based upon the population growth. And you have a Palestinian laboratory and all the horrific things that have happened as a result of this. Whereas if you change it to a hostile Iran, think about it. You get the Gulf bases, so you get leverage over Iran and the strategic tension between the Gulf countries and Iran. You get fleet deployments that you get to fund through the petrodollar. You get weapon sales, continue revolving door into the yield on the petrodollar by the US treasuries. You get to prop up the dollar as world reserve currency. You get additional military budgets that you can justify to the Americans, hence why you manufacture the fake war and terror, and you have false flags like 9/11 that happened via Safari Club, which was a George Bush operation that had significant oil interests in a partnership between Mossad, Saudi intelligence, and CIA. You get permanent regional pressure that justifies this. And you get the Iran threat that you continually use that narrative, death to America, death to Israel, which becomes a very important weapon. Remember in the Iraq war, they had the fake anthrax that was sent through to the journalists, and it said death to America, death to Israel, and the Palestinian stuff. They tried to blame it on the Palestinians. They tried to connect Osama bin Laden and a CIA asset that was manufactured via the intelligence operations in Saudi after the assassinations. You get to use that narrative in order to justify war. You got the Iran-Iraq war. They basically killed close to 1 million people, many children. So what we're seeing in Gaza was normal So when you think this isn't how America operates, this is how Israel operates. Now, Israel operates exactly how America's always operated, which is the same way the Brits and the Dutch and the other colonial European empires operated. Nothing new there. So you get close to 1 million people that were killed, while the US is publicly backed by Iraq and was later implicated in sending arms and doing arms deals with Iran in 1980, funding or providing weapons for both sides, including chemical weapons to Iraq, which gives you your WMD narrative, while also providing weapons in Iran even after the Shah, after those contracts. And that was called the Iran-Contra affair. I've covered it many times. You can check out my blog. Go to Simon Dixon, put in Iran. You can see the history of all these different things and covert ops. So Iran became the central justification as a result of this for basically the Carter administration doctrine, the Carter doctrine. And so you had an operation, I think it was called CENTCOM, which was the Carter doctrine. You had Gulf military expansion as a result. You had arms sales to Gulf monarchies. You had decades of regional military interventions. You had the petrodollar framework. And you had the very useful narrative that Iran is 2 weeks away from a bomb so that you could radicalize the Americans, and you create the religious strategic tensions via the terrorist factories via Israel, which created and manufactured ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the IDF, the Zionists, the Christian Zionists, the Jewish Zionists, re-educated, infiltrated many of the Christian religious institutions. But this went across multiple administrations, which is why I said the politicians are just the front people. Trump's not in charge yet. Trump's waiting instructions. His job is to be the front person for real power, just as Netanyahu was the front person for real power. But we had decades and decades without resolution. And never did you ever have Iran and Israel actually, attack each other. You just had the expansion of funding resistance as well. Now, as I said, this can happen at the highest level. It can be covert as well. So whether you agree or disagree with the conspiracy or whether it is, the interpretation, it doesn't really matter, because it still suggests that there were relationships, and realpolitik means that you have vested interest, and vested interest creates the preservation of power structures. But all of the evidence shows that Washington, Khamenei, and the Ayatollah in general was way more complex than the public narrative, at the very least. And again, this isn't saying that there's some grand conspiracy. This is saying, what do you do in survival mode in order to deal with the MIC and the FIC? But it's way more complicated than it was presented at the time. And it's plausible that this carried on over time. So these covert operations are basically in layers as well. So it's always on a need-to-know basis. So many people don't know as they work for as well. So think of this as a few layers. So with the resistance, you have layer one. This is ordinary people that have been through genuine trauma. And they're basically defending their homeland. They've got genuine resistance. They are doing what you would probably most likely do if you were in their framework. Now, they're framed as, for the West, terrorists. Another person's terrorists is another person's freedom fighters. But they are the victims of much of the death and destruction that Mick just doesn't care about. The terrorism that props up the dollar and profits from it. But these resistance movements, they have genuine grievances. And that's layer one. What's layer two? Well, the layer two is the ideology. You frame and put some religion on top. And then you infiltrate much of religious infrastructure. So you have people that have genuine grievances as the soldiers and the resistance. Then you can have radicalization operations by weaponizing ideology. So they are genuinely fighting for their religious cause. They're fighting for their religious narrative. They're fighting for their political narrative, whether it be a state, whether it be a theocracy, whatever it be. They're fighting for their expansionist belief that that's what they're doing. They're furthering the cause. They're furthering the ideologies. And it is, strategies that are being used. This is like for Israel, the Greater Israel Project, the settlements. You financially incentivize as well. You create an apartheid state with European Ashkenazi Jews on top. Then you have the local, Jews from the Middle East in another layer. Then you have the Ethiopian Jews, which are a layer down in a caste system. Then you have the imported work to replace the Palestinians, whether it be the Taiwan, the Thai, the Filipinos, and various other things. And then you have the Palestinians that they consider at the bottom of the chain. Then you create the type of environment that justifies such a behavior that leads to this inhumane genocidal behavior. Then on the other side, you create these global Islamic state narratives as well, and people believe and they buy into them. And that's the vast majority of the people. But what about layer 3? Layer 3 is at the top. This is basically the state bargaining. State bargaining is not ideological. It's not radicalized. It's not genuine grievances. At that stage, it is realpolitik, because you have to deal with your neighbors. You have to deal with your enemies. And so this is state-level bargaining. It doesn't even need to be conspiratorial. It can be just geopolitical survival, regime survival. It can be power structural survival. It can be vested interest in military structures across parallel structures, even integrated into mafia networks with blackmail operations. And so to think that these are just conspiracies, it's reality. Thinking that this doesn't exist is really a conspiracy theory. So at that layer, it's geopolitical negotiations. It's deals between power structures, power dynamics. And often countries are captured, as America, as UK, as the West. There are other types of structures. Within Iran, you have the Ayatollah, you have the Iranian Republic, and then you have the government, which has a democratic process, but signed off in a theocratic way. Then you have absolute monarchies in the Gulf countries. These all have different power structures and power dynamics based upon central banking, maintaining of resources, regime change, color revolutions, bribes, USAID, all sorts of stuff. But it's power structures that are negotiating with each other. And they trade conflict for leverage. This is why you get the funding of these proxy groups, of these militia groups, of these. And this is not unique to Iran, despite the fact that you're told that this is just Iran. This happens by the largest one that does this is America. This happens by Russia. This happens by Turkey. This happens by Saudi. This happens by UAE, in Sudan, in Libya, in Yemen. And so if you're just being told one narrative, you're not being told the full story. But most people, they, focus on layer 1. They think it is, layer 1 or layer 2. But what we're witnessing right now, some people think that it's all ideology and religion. That's the soldiers. That's the management. That's the middle management. At the top layers, it's different. So very few focus on layer 3, which is why I always focus there and follow the money. And Evan did a great article on that, which goes through some of the history. So we're living through basically layer 3 right now. Iran appears to be negotiating, away much of its regional axis, which is what we've been saying. How do you get the axis to be integrated into the political side, into the army, so that there's not external forces? And that's being done in exchange for sanction relief, normalization, investment contracts via a fund, releasing of oil onto the market, and basically a seat at the table in the emerging multipolar world order that is headed by China, negotiated with the sovereign wealth funds into the FIC and transnational capital. It's the smartest thing to do because the world order has changed. And this is how you get more leverage. But you can't just do it because everyone's focused on layer 1 and layer 2. And that is why you need such a transition as we're having right now. So Arachi is effectively doing the Shah's job again, was the premise of the article, but in a different flavor. And that is bringing Iran back into the integration of the system. So what did we have? Trump canceled the escalation cycle. At the moment, it's said that the MOU is going to be signed next week. That then leads to 60 days of negotiating term. This is how any investment banking merger and acquisition deal was timed. You set milestones in case things go off board. Apparently this is ready to be signed in Europe, but it's going to be called the Islamabad Accords because Pakistan did the hard work. And that was because China Belt and Road Initiative in Pakistan to reverse IMF influence. Now, obviously, Pakistan is at their lowest end of dollars. But you saw prior to this that Saudi Arabia refinanced some of the UAE funds. And so that is more aligned with making sure Saudi interests are protected, who wants no resistance. And UAE is acquiring Israel assets. You see, the basic narrative just doesn't get you there. But these are nuanced conversations. You have to follow the money. You have to be willing to put some time into this and invest the structure. So Iran then says that there's no negotiations right now anymore. They're pulling out. Then you get, okay, here's what's agreed. The usual, theatrics that are needed. But Pakistan is saying that the negotiations will continue and the deal will be done. China and Russia, MIC, are basically testing their intelligence, which is providing all of these infrastructure targets as well. And the US effectively get to use Israel as bad cop, because they are bad cop. And don't get me wrong, this is not to obfuscate Israel from their crimes against humanity. That's a jurisdiction. But they work for greater powers. Who are they lobbied by? Who's MIC? It is what Israel was set up for, originally by the British Empire. Israel gets to do the bad cop side when it is needed. And the Americans and MAGA get to have this theatrical side where eventually Trump pulls away from Netanyahu, and MAGA tards get to say, you see, Trump was playing 5G chess. But the question, and we'll return back to it, did AI literally end the war? Well, the answer is no. But did the AI capital cycle require stability right now in this moment? And I think possibly yes. And that's why I followed the money and hypothesized that we would get this. I originally thought we'd have it done by the China Xi Jinping meeting, but that's what led to effectively the opening up of the Strait of Hormuz, based upon the Taiwan side and the agreements with the trade war as well. So let's watch this roll out. And we got to watch the bond yields. We got to really track the AI liquidity needs, the stock needs. I'll be following the ETF flows as well. And I want to cover one more thing so that we can then tie all this together and theorize where it goes next and how you protect yourself. So let's talk Bitcoin for the final section, and a bit of crypto and a bit of AI, because they're all tied together as well. So I want you to understand that if you're playing the investment game, successful investors, they dollar cost average because market timing is very hard. And they buy every single month. But they buy their positions into fear. And sometimes they say, all right, I'm going to position into fear. And retail sells into fear. And so retail selling their Bitcoin right now, and MicroStrategy is buying it. The AI rotation is happening, where retail institutional had to sell some of their Bitcoin and some of all their Bitcoin ETF because they need to make the AI trade as well. That's mandated to make sure they don't miss out on some of these things potentially. But that's the capital rotation. So retail sells fear. Institutions, basically, they always sell into greed. So when everyone is at maximum greed point, they're selling. And I know this because I was a market maker and I used to sell into the sales traders. We used to play the liquidity cycle. And I worked in corporate finance when we would take these companies public before I left investment banking. So I know all this through firsthand experience. I also used to work in stockbroking where we would create these narratives to sell stocks. And so this is all direct experience. And I know, that when there is IPOs on this highest level, then BlackRock the asset managers manage their portfolios around that. So retail buys greed. So they buy the top and they buy into the greed cycles as well. So if you apply this same lesson to Bitcoin and look at what's happening in Bitcoin and AI right now, this is a brilliant accumulation period. And I have seen these time and time again. Only 4 times have I seen Bitcoin below the 200-day moving average. Now, it may go down further. Great. That means that you get to buy more Bitcoin with your fiat currency. But if you're waiting for it to go down, you won't get the timing perfect. And you're doing it in self-custody as you're getting to drain the system a little bit. But you can focus on your ownership. That's the important part here. That's the key message I want you to take away. You have to focus on your ownership and you have to own more Bitcoin, maybe more gold, maybe more AI stocks, however you're playing the strategy and leaning into this every month. And you need to become an owner. So I also want you to focus on self-custody because self-custody is the only way. That's why I can constantly reiterate that. And that's why we're getting this whole thing. And I covered some of the previously around MicroStrategy. Now, why do I focus so much on MicroStrategy? MSTR, MicroStrategy, STRC, the new yield product from MicroStrategy, and IBIT, the Bitcoin ETF, because they have become the central bank of paper Bitcoin, and they have won the narrative for the short-term price. Their job is to centralize as much Bitcoin as possible. And so if you want to know what's happening in the price of Bitcoin short-term, you just need to look at MicroStrategy Bitcoin accumulation and the premium or discount to the net asset value. You need to look at STRC, what yield they're paying, and the premium or discount to the $100. And you look at the inflows and outflows of IBIT, combined with fear and greed narrative, as well as the accumulation through nodes like Jane Street and Cantor Fitzgerald to try and get as much of that Bitcoin away from self-custody and into Wall Street wrappers, where it's nicely controlled by the FIC, where they can leverage it for derivatives and create paper Bitcoin, and also get you to borrow against it so they can mine some fiat currency and margin call you or earn fees if they don't margin call you. So strategy was down heavily as a result of what we covered last week. Won't go into it, but 32 Bitcoin sell, then 1,115 purchase. The sell was at $77,000. The purchase was at $65,000. There was some dilution. And then you get a change in the Bitcoin per share to defend the premium and all the tools. Think of, this financial industrial complex has the little knobs that the arbitrageurs can press in order to short-term control the price of Bitcoin. They've won that game. I warned everyone along the way. I told everyone from Bitcoin at $3 to accumulate as much as you can, own more Bitcoin every single month. Before I was sharing how the exchanges were playing that game. Now it's Wall Street, and now they've got the tools. So now we're in this where everyone was saying, don't worry, we're a mature asset right now. I was saying, no, expect big corrections in Bitcoin. You got the real manipulators in now. You got the FIC in. And that's what happened. And so people were ready if you're long-term followers. But Saylor is effectively becoming the paper Bitcoin central bank Kevin Walsh, Jerome Powell's type of character, where you need to watch what they say, which is the phase at which we have hit right now. We're not going to be able to change that. Now, what we can do is we can boycott the system with self-custody. We can stop caring about price by being a longer-term investors. We can boycott the banks by not using their leverage. But we can understand some of the price by understanding the game that we're in right now. And the short-term price is owned by FIC. We can stop pretending that. So BTC purchases continue from strategy. They want to centralize as much as they can. I hope that you won't be a part of that. You'll end up with your own Bitcoin so that we can maintain more in self-custody, because that's an important property. And their dollar reserves are increasing as well at the same time. So the main point here is that MSTR is the FIC Bitcoin financialization vehicle. It is an arbitrage vehicle, and it wants to centralize as much Bitcoin as possible. It's not on our team. It controls the price short term through the complex that's been built. And then you just follow the IBIT inflows and outflows to see what institutions are doing with Bitcoin. And out now, you can see that there was, in this crash, there was $4 billion of outflows around the AI trade that we covered. How do you get that? Well, BlackRock has their Aladdin technology, and anyone that's scenario planning the closure of the Strait of Hormuz with the AI trade, they would be given the same strategy. And that leads to these capital outflows. That then leads to a narrative that decreases the premium, corrects the price, crashes Bitcoin. And then when you decouple from the STRC yield at $100, you get more subordination, more dividend commitment, and those dividends can be switched off at will, which tells us, really the arbitrage that is being played right now. So with MSTR, you follow the MNAV and the premium and the arbitrage that you can look at. And it is just, you have to play the short term versus the long term game. On the short term, you have to become a trader. And I don't encourage that. That's their game. They win that game. That's the paper Bitcoin game. That's the leverage game. But the long term, you can just self-custody, dollar cost average, and you can own more Bitcoin every single month. That's real Bitcoin. That's the real game. That's your game. That's the game that anyone can win. And you don't have to own a whole Bitcoin. You can do it with any amount. But you can even manage capital as well, using relative strength. So, I said some people will own assets, but always try and be in the best asset. That's a lot harder game. That's the manipulator game. You can try and do it, or you can have part of your portfolio that does that. Or you can just do okay, I've got a long-term thesis. I need more Bitcoin. I'm happy when it crashes. So I dollar cost average. Whatever the price is, I buy every month. Dollar cost average, Bitcoin, gold, AI, whatever you need to do. But you have to own more assets. And that is not the same as crypto. Bitcoin is not crypto. Crypto is a FIC psyop to build programmable custody, programmable money, central bank digital currency, stable coins, tokenized assets, where you will own nothing and be happy. That is the psyop. And we saw this with all of the different crypto scams and foundations, and what happened with Cardano and Near Protocol and all of these things. You don't want to be playing that game. That is the degenerate gambling game where they are issuing crypto to end up with more Bitcoin at the expense of you. The stable coin is the programmable money, the UBI. This is the integration with central bank digital currencies. This is becoming the payment rails for artificial intelligence. Agents will be programmed where you allocate some of your funds to a stable coin that agent can access, and they will probably trade, manage your finance, whatever it may be, manage your payments. And so stable coins is the programmable money. It will be integrated with AI, and you need your freedom money outside of that as well, your freedom savings. Now, with programmable money, it's all built upon networks like Ethereum, which are proof of stake. Proof of stake means whoever owns the coins owns the stake and owns the network, which is why in a Bitcoin ETF, BlackRock they can own as much Bitcoin as possible, but they don't control the network because it's proof of work. That's miners and nodes. But with proof of stake, they own the network. So they'll try and get as much stakes as possible, own as much of the network as possible so that they can control the governance through stable coins. So they want to control that layer one, and Bitcoin remains savings technology with a payment system built on top of it that you can send anywhere and you can take with you at scale. So I just want to end on a few more things and a few more lessons. For those of you that were with me back in the 2020, 2021, 2022 leverage cycle, you may have missed all of that if you're new to the channel. But an old SBF, Sam Bankman-Fried, popped up that was part of the ops from those cycle. The whole Peter Thiel operations where he destroyed Silicon Valley Bank by coming on Spaces and withdrawing his money and getting everyone to withdraw their money. Then you had FTX that was connected to Sullivan and Cromwell, which are deep state, Mossad, CIA type of legal firms who were also on the board. SBF and the connections and the follow the money, and you can see that it went back to Silvergate Bank and the stablecoin network they built between Signature, Silvergate, Silicon Valley Bank, and some of the other banks that were taken out in that period that bought the technology from Facebook, Libra, that was all funded via founders funds and the Peter Thiel networks that were connected to Jeffrey Epstein and some of the infiltration operations. I've covered many of those on my blog. I'll give you some link to them as well if you want to catch up on the history. But take SBF as a lesson. He applied this week. He's in prison after defrauding billions of dollars via his hedge fund Alameda. He came from Jane Street, which was part of the arbitrage network that Peter Thiel came from, and the currency wars and these currency operations like people like George Soros and Peter Thiel. But he requested a pardon. And he requested a pardon with Trump. And I want you to understand just the lesson of what happened. So when FTX went bankrupt, it goes into a FIC process. And that FIC process is called Chapter 11. And it's a big club and you're not invited. I went through my one when I was a creditor within Celsius. And I read through 4,000-page documents and spent 2.5 years trying to help victims of that one. And I was personally had a $45 million claim. Fortunately, I can afford to lose that. But there were 650,000 victims. Many of them couldn't afford. Some had their whole entire lifetime savings, pensioners, all sorts of stuff. I've covered this many times if you're a long-term listener. But Operation Choke Point 2.0 was the operation that effectively broke those banks, that exposed the fraud, that led to Chapter 11. And once Chapter 11, Sam Bankman-Fried, by spending client money, actually was a seed investor in the biggest AI companies. Anthropic, SpaceX, they used client money in order to purchase these major assets. He also had a lot of client Bitcoin. And what did the FIC do with those assets? Well, they auctioned off all the discounted assets like Solana to the highest FIC bidder. They auctioned off all the AI private equity at the lowest pretty much rates at that time. Yeah, they were taking on the risk, but they also dollarized the Bitcoin at $17,000. And as part of the pardon, SBF is saying, see, the price of well, he's not saying this, but because the price of many of the assets went up, he's saying if you had one Bitcoin, you were only entitled to $17,000 back. You should have been entitled to one Bitcoin back. That's how I lobbied the judge for the first time to make the Celsius bankruptcy significantly better. Got it where we couldn't get the Bitcoin back, but we got them to not sell the Bitcoin so that we ended up getting settled in Bitcoin. And now we're receiving more Bitcoin as a result of that. But that didn't happen in FTX. That was my, I worked hard to try and achieve that with the other creditors as well. And I'm very proud that we got that. But this was a massive AI asset transfer to the FIC. It was locking in Bitcoin at $17,000 so that SBF could eventually then try and apply for a pardon and say nobody was harmed. But he got bailed out by the appreciation in the assets, which were then auctioned off to others as well. So anyway, understand that Chapter 11 is one process. And what's happening with MicroStrategy is, why would they want to put it in Chapter 11? People are focused on the bankruptcy. They could, because FIC will benefit from it. But in the meantime, they can manipulate the short-term price and try and persuade you to custody your Bitcoin with them and borrow against it and gamble with them so that they end up with your Bitcoin. And that's much more useful to them. And so, you know, it's the same thing that we saw with all the foundation coins. Zcash, I call it Ziocash, came from technology in Tel Aviv University, had a trusted setup that was like a trust me bro, where Peter Dodd, a Zionist, we had to trust that he destroyed the keys. And then it was connected to a company. And that company was funded by Zionists like Barry Silbert and others. And then, you know, we had to trust these invisible transactions. And now AI does a hack on it. And they're saying, trust me, bro, it's okay. They didn't print more Zcash, but they can't prove that without destroying the network type of thing. And so all of these different things, whether it be Cardano, we're seeing right now, whether it be Hype, whether it be Near, none of them are Bitcoin. Once you learn that lesson, they are degenerate gambling tools with centralized foundations. The AI is going to probably destroy their security model. And that's why we focus, and I've always asked, you know, that Bitcoin remains different because of its structure. So I did a few things this week, and we're going to be coming towards the end. But I put together a blog after an interview I did on Tom Ballou's Impact Theory channel. It's approaching 1 million views. If you haven't watched it again, hopefully watch that. I think we're on about 700,000 at this time. We got 1 million on the Peter McCormack one. Hopefully we can have second wind on that and we get to 1 million views. That would be great. We're already at 700,000 in the top 10 videos of all time. So very, very grateful. If you haven't watched it, go and watch it. But many people took clips out of it because they liked some of the stuff that I said. And one of the bits I was asked questions on who I thought Satoshi Nakamoto is. So if you go over to simondixon.com, you can find a blog, and we'll put it in the description as well, on who is Satoshi Nakamoto. And I really want you to understand this subject because people are so confused, because I do think that it did come from an open source offshoot from an intelligence op around digital currencies, CBDCs, and stable coins and stuff. But go check it out. I gave a short clip there. Watch the video. And then you can go get a link to the full video. And I linked to other blogs. If you want to understand Bitcoin, I want you to understand there are ops to make sure you don't own Bitcoin. One is saying that it's an intelligence op. And a bit of truth makes you miss the point. And so go check out that blog on who is Satoshi Nakamoto. At the bottom of it, I linked to other ones if you really want to dig deep, because I've answered all these questions. It's not like some people tell me, "Oh, you're falling for it." I created a blog on whether Bitcoin was a CIA asset, and I went through an honest analysis, like 3 hours of went through all the different stuff. You can link through that, and had created a video on that. I also did it on whether, a blog on whether Bitcoin was created by Jeffrey Epstein. People think that. So I went through all the Epstein infiltration operations so that you cannot fall for these things. I also linked to how Jane Street and Strategy and JP Morgan and BlackRock manipulate the price. So I don't run away from these things. I want you to understand these things so that you're not feared into the ops that means you end up giving your Bitcoin to the custodian. Also, those that try and push hard forks, different versions of Bitcoin. I give a critique on whether Bitcoin was hijacked and went through the different hijacking operations and gave the other side of the story, because people confuse you with one side. So I'll put the link in the description here. And I just want you to understand that FIC want your Bitcoin, and they want you to custody. And they use all of this in order to do that. So now let's move into the final conclusion, and we're going to wrap all this up. And that's going to do it for this episode of Simon Dixon Hard Talk Live. So AI, I believe, does actually create abundance. But ownership is what's going to determine who benefits from it for real. And that's what you need to understand. It's the ownership that's going to determine whether you're in a position to benefit from it through asset ownership. Real war definitely creates destruction, but it's going to be the contracts of the rebuild that determines who's in charge, who profited from this. And so it's not the narrative that you need to follow. It's how did that building get destroyed and who invested and profited from the rebuild. That tells you what's really happening, and they'll never tell you that. I think AI crashes the next capital cycle. And I think there is inherent rug pulls built into it that I've been covering. But I think Bitcoin remains one of the few ways that ordinary people can basically own part of the future, rather than rent the assets or rent the access in the subscription industrial complex. And that's why I'm keen for everyone to explore self-custody. I think we're going to have an AI pump and dump cycle. And that crisis is needed in order to get the quantitative easing that justifies the money printing in order to socialize the losses. And I think that's going to be very hard to time. So I'm not going to even try and time it. But we will keep watching and we will keep covering. But it's self-custody. It's accumulation and becoming an asset owner, which is going to be protecting you. And it's following the money rather than the narrative that I'll keep doing. And hopefully you will keep watching and enjoying. And so with that in mind, we're now going to move over to part 2, which is my interview on Peter McCormack's show. It was a face-to-face interview. We're going to premiere that now, and we'll link to the video where you can watch it. But this is going to be everything we're doing on the live part of the segment. And hopefully this will push you over or link through to part 2 with the Peter McCormack interview. And that's where I'm going to be sharing that the actual AI government, the global structure, it's actually here. And what you can do with AI as somebody that needs to lean into it. And we discussed that on that podcast. So always remember, you are alive at one of the scariest, interesting, and most exciting times in financial history. Some are going to get wrecked, and that's going to be labor. Others are going to do really well. That's going to be the asset owner that gets this right. I want you to be on the right side of the change, because when you're on the right side of the change, I want a community of people, because it's the community that's going to be able to help people to manage this transition. And those are going to need to be sovereign people. And hopefully that will help you create a sovereign company where you can own your sovereign assets. And maybe you can just make your country a bit more sovereign, but understand that it's following the money that's going to make that difference. And so I'm going to see you this time next week. We'll see what happens with the SpaceX IPO. Enjoy the journey. And hopefully we can move forward with more peace. If the MIC gets drained, that's what we need to drain. And you do that with Bitcoin and self-custody. Peace. We are in the midst right now of transitioning to an architecture of, I'd say, a one world government control grid. Everybody needs to lean in. There is no way you can fight it.
What I can't get my head around is, who are the winners and losers?
Politics is gone. Like, if you're wasting time on politics, I think you're wasting vital energy. You need to build for yourself, and it starts with you and your family, and your community. The whole monopoly board is being thrown up by, I believe, an agenda to build a police and surveillance state of programmable money, social credit scores, and artificial intelligence.
Have I talked to you about the golden pill?
No.
You've had every pill, you know how it works, you know how the system works, and you have a choice of blue pill, but you don't want to do it. You've understood through the red pill. You've had your depressing black pill moment. You've had your white pill. Now it's like the golden pill is like, this is reality, and I'm going to build my world in it.
So that's it. We beat. There is a global agenda to take us to the most centralized version of control grid that the world will ever see. And even if it happens, which I believe it will, even if it happens, it doesn't matter if you're sovereign.
Yeah, so the algorithms control a lot of this game, what you're doing. And actually, in some ways, I don't like it because you become a slave to the algorithm. I've been talking to other podcast hosts, and you don't really have a choice. Well, you do. You have a choice of not playing the algorithm, and your show, you can make an amazing show and it can bomb. You and I could have a brilliant 2 hour conversation. If we haven't hit some massive topics in the first 10 minutes, it just bombs.
Yeah.
And so if you really want to juice the algorithm, you've got to hit them in 30 seconds with a big hit. You've got to keep them engaged for the first kind of like minute of, that's why they all do trailers, you know, that first minute of the show, they show you all the big bits. So you go, oh, I want to watch that. And then you've got to like try and keep people on average above 20 minutes. And you've got to bait them in with a title. Now, if you're Joe Rogan, you don't need to do this. You've established, everyone loves you. You do 1 million on Spotify every episode. But most other people have to play this game. And I've even noticed shows I really like are just not performing like they used to because they're getting beat by other people playing the game.
Yeah. This is also part of the scary mechanism for control, right? So we call it freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach. I think that was the new... So we had the censorship model where there seemed like there was a moment when everything was, okay, if you step too far out of the line, then we'll just cancel you. But there was a very decisive moment, I think, when it transitioned to freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach. And I think it coincided with the release of AI and us building our social credit score. So I think we hit a moment where they said, okay, the cat's out of the bag. We want you talking about everything, but we want you telling your truth so that we can profile you. Now, we won't give you reach. We'll only boost what we want to boost. And I think also there is putting people into the most radical version of themselves.
Yeah.
By continually feeding them like a narrative. So they figure out what your narrative is, and then they keep feeding you into that narrative. And I think it radicalizes you more and more and more into your worldview.
But you say they.
The algorithms.
But so like there's the conspiratorial side, that there's some control over the algorithms to move public perception on issues, or to move public perception, or change the way you think and behave. But there is also the revenue side of algorithms, where everybody who has an algorithm has a company that generates money from advertising or whatever, and they play on the weaknesses of the mind, the inner perversions, the inner perverse curiosity. It's like there's a period. I think most blokes go through a period of time where they're watching people getting their heads cut off or shot or murdered on various social media channels, and then that's all it feeds you is people getting killed, and then you're like, I can't fucking watch this shit anymore. And so I think, is it a conspiracy, or is it just the algorithms understand us as humans?
It can be both. So, there is what is the primary goal? The primary goal is that you're in a doom loop, right? You never leave the device. And so they need to maximize for, how do I get you on this device for as long as possible? And the more time you spend on that device, the more they can build your profile. Then it's understanding the data and addictive nature to keep you locked in. But then there's the business model, and the business model is advertising. And so advertisers can pay to change a game. And that could come from anywhere. That could come from either a business agenda, it could come from political, it could come from intelligence. And so you could, they are consistent, but there are certain levels, like during the cancellation culture, I think there was a intelligent, we need to cancel people in order to convert them into assets, ruin their life, sue them, put them in some kind of compromised network, and then try and bring them back as an asset. And I think that's what the cancel culture was for everyone that came back from the cancellation.
That was broad Epstein.
Yeah, I mean, infamously Alex Jones, you can see him like pre and post cancellation. And you can also, you can see that there is a compromised network, and once you get to a certain stage, you are an asset. And if you don't comply with, if they can't weaponize you effectively and utilize you, then they can do something. They can do the cancel operation in order to bring you back in, and then that there is bounded escalation in your narrative. Just like allowing people to monetize on X, people learn behaviors, right? They learn the sensationalist headline that's kind of not quite true, but in line with what gets a lot of traffic and a lot of comments and riles people up. You can boost those people and boost their income. And so you're training people into the speech you want them to have. And you just pick up these assets, and if they comply more and more, then you can just build these communities.
Well, what is the hierarchy of the structure that you think makes that happen?
Well, I think media is just about power. It's not like a money business model. Media is captured in the sense that most of them are public companies. So they start at, everyone starts out as like a decentralized group of trying to spread a message, or trying to build a business for yourself. It depends which way you are. So if like the founder of a podcast is building it as a business, then immediately you're into okay, I've got this amount of money, now I need to get sponsorship. Sponsorship means that there's a certain message where I can't go down, because it's bad for business. Then you have, the monetization algorithms that's teaching you the behavior and the types of things you should be talking about. And then I think you get to a level of you're bigger than traditional media, the top podcasts.
Did YouTube let us monetize Simon?
Yeah, it did.
Yeah, we're allowed to monetize you.
Okay, so there's a narrative that's acceptable there, or there's just a load of money to be made.
Well, we're not big enough.
I think the CPM was way down on that episode.
Yeah, it's really interesting because there is there's a part of me, Simon, who goes, do you know what? Fuck YouTube, fuck Spotify. I'll just build a subscription-only podcast, and whoever wants to pay will pay to do it. There's that Patreon video the guy who founded Patreon did called 1,000 True Fans. Have you ever seen it?
No.
It's brilliant. He said most creative people don't realize you need 1,000 true fans. If you're a guitarist, you can write songs and release a record every, a single every couple of months. Those 1,000 true fans will buy everything you do. They'll buy your t-shirt, whatever. If you've got 1,000 true fans who'll spend £100 a year with you, £100,000, you can be a creative. But a lot of people are thinking wide and broad, and they want to play at Wembley Stadium, and actually you need 1,000 true fans. But then there's the flip side. If you make it subscription only, well, you as a guest, I mean, maybe not you, somebody else is going to go, well, I was coming on when you were reaching 500,000 people because it was good for me. Now you're reaching a few thousand subscribers. I don't care. And then there's your whole ego. It's like, well, I want my show to be successful.
Yeah.
There's a big balance to be played.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is how we win, by the way. This is like, there's a lot of doomerism. There's a lot of understanding how the world really works. There's a lot of black pilling at the moment. But there's something about scale that doesn't work. There's something about a big company, a big country, a big, where something, a structure of protectionism and capture just hits a certain point. And I found this with all my investments as well. Every single company I invested in like the Bitcoin space particularly, it started that way. It started with the original ethos of trying to get people decentralized money that no one could control. But then they get in the regulatory capture. So they set up a company, and then there's a board, and then that board needs to apply for a license, and then it needs to maintain a banking relationship, and then it needs venture capital funding, and then it needs, if it succeeds, to be a public company, and then it's just a full-blown subordinate of what I call the financial industrial complex at that stage. Then they load you up with debt. You've got equity and voting rights. Then they have the ability to put a board seat on your company, and those are the captured vehicles. Now, what they don't want, there's like a couple of people I found, or a couple of categories to simplify this down. You've got people that have no real money, are like deep in debt. They're kind of like the product of the system. They're paying their interest, they're paying their rent, they're paying their mortgage, they're paying their credit card, and they're finding their situation getting worse and worse and worse, and they're complaining. Like, they're able to talk about it. They're shouting like as loud as they can, but no one really cares. You could sit here and talk about, oh, we got to do something about Epstein, the victims of Epstein. It does nothing, right? It just carries on. Then there's real power. Let's say, let's get at the corporate level, someone like Elon Musk about to do a $2 trillion IPO for SpaceX. These people are captured within a bounded compromise layers. Like, you don't get access to the capital. We can destroy your share price. You will lose all your advertising. APAC will come at you, or military lobby will come at you, or whatever it may be. Will destroy your business. So there's all those like levers. And most people there, like, it's very rare to get a wild card there. Most people, they're captured by the system, even though there may not be like a massively, blackmail big operation happening there. But they're just preserving their own interests. And their own interests are designed to keep you where you don't talk out against the system. And this is kind of why I got into Bitcoin, because Bitcoin created all these really rich people that came from that ideology. And Wall Street went about capturing them all one by one. And all the companies I invested in, they all got captured. But the ones that ended up with a company with no VC funding, just like Bitcoin on their balance sheet, the ones that got their own Bitcoin in self-custody, and they got rich, and they got influence, and maybe they started podcasts and various other things. That's the category that the system doesn't like, which is rich, powerful, influential, ability to even create a movement with 1,000 true fans that can all pay for themselves and pay without financial guardrails and the ability to be cancelled. And then it ends up, you're kind of just you're working for YouTube at that stage. So you always, there's a spectrum of subordination in everything. And you're trying to get further and further into being sovereign, a sovereign company, a sovereign country, a sovereign individual. But there's always something you're bounded by. But when you are like rich, wealthy, not subordinate to all of those layers, you don't have a mortgage, you're in what I call a sovereign zone, and that sovereign zone is what the system doesn't like. They really don't want those people, because you're in a position to actually influence change, and they don't have all the layers of control on you. And so that's rare. You don't find many of those, because they're always stuck in a business that drives them in a different direction that makes them comply.
How do we get more of them?
Well, that was, I think, the Bitcoin movement. I think it is about, and this is why I always thought that crypto was a psyop, because it took a long-term economically sound philosophy of own more Bitcoin each month and do that for 10 years. And it replaced it with try and outperform Bitcoin, launch this is your path to wealth, create your own version, or just trade and gamble and leverage and all that stuff. And that psyoped a lot of people. And so you got to get a people with a longer term plan, an understanding of the rules, and then working towards being that sovereign individual. And you kind of got two ways of going about it, I think. You either accept this is the system and I understand the rules, right? I need to invest in AI companies on the stock market, and I know I'm building or I'm investing in. My money is, overtly building the police and surveillance state. And I need to utilize AI to be as productive as possible, because opting out of it just means you're not going to make any difference or make any change. So you either go full into the system, understand the rules of the system, and then become that person. And because everyone else is just stuck down here, you're not getting any of the upside. You're not getting the shares. You're not getting anything. You don't have a business. You're just a loud voice with no influence. And all of them need to have like a long-term plan, but everything's driving people into this get rich quick. I need to do it quickly. I've only got a few years left. And so how do we drive that? I think in economics, we called it time preference. And then how do you drive that time preference behavior? Keep people on track where they don't become subordinate, and then have the kahunas to actually speak out against the system when it may punish you and make you lose all your wealth that's connected to the system, but keep your wealth that they can't capture. And so you either change the system from within the system by understanding the rules, or you generate sovereign wealth outside the system and become that wealthy person that can actually just build its wealth outside the system, speak against the system.
Well, what's at stake here? Like, somebody hasn't listened to our last two shows.
Yeah.
What are we talking about here? What's at stake here right now?
Well, we are in the midst right now of transitioning to a voluntary opt-in just due to the way the game has been set up, an architecture.
Architecture of what?
An architecture of, I'd say, a one world government control grid, where we have no choice but to lean into artificial intelligence. We have no choice but to lean into robotics for like businesses in the real world that are actually building things, because you'll get crushed. And from the individual investor that's allocating their money, no choice but to invest it, because you'll be inflated away into non-existence.
But hold on, isn't that just capitalism? Like, isn't that just what happened with the internet?
What do you mean, what happened?
So when we had the internet revolution, the digital revolution that came with that, companies who didn't adopt it got destroyed. We lost Blockbuster, we lost magazines and newspapers. You had to become part of that or you were wiped out.
Yeah.
Aren't we just doing the same again with AI?
I think so. However, what comes on the other side of AI? And I think this is a different game. I think structurally, artificial intelligence, firstly, it wipes out the ability to monetize in many cases. So everything's moving towards free, which is like a deflationary concept or a disinflationary concept. And quite clearly, the evidence is showing that people are, the tech companies right now are investing in data centers to replace humans. So we are moving towards something that's going to take away jobs, but not in a similar way to the previous disruptions that anyone that's a billionaire invested in AI will tell you right now. That's trying to tell you that we're moving to universal high income, and that we're moving to, they'll give the examples of the internet and the computer and how it created new businesses and new jobs. I don't think that's what's happening in this case.
I've become really bullish on AI over the last couple of weeks at a personal level because I've been going kind of like deep in Claude. I've been spending like 15 hours a day building stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I used to have an agency here in London where we would build websites and applications. And we at the football club have a number of disparate systems. We have our merch system, and we sell merch in 3 places, and we have no stock management. We sell it online, we sell it at the club and at the coffee shop. We have our financial system, which is Xero. We have players that we manage and their contracts. We have staff that we manage. We have communications. In 9 days, I integrated this all into one intranet. Not only does it work, it looks beautiful because I created an AI agent with the 15 years experience of designing applications at Apple. I built an architecture of a team. I've got a security agent. And so if I'd had my agency and you'd come to me with that brief, I'd said, yes, about a year. We'd probably get the first module out in 3 to 6 months. Cost you £1 million, and I'd have a team of 12 people working on it. One guy on his own. I can't code for shit. Yet it's teaching me how to set up Vercel, teaching me how to set up GitHub, teaching me how to set up Supperbase. I'm running the SQL queries. Yeah, and God knows what it's doing in the background, but the ability to do that in 9 days is incredible. And then I wanted to redesign our website, and we use Squarespace. Problem with Squarespace, you're limited to the templates. And so complex things like how I want to display fixtures and results for the football team is difficult. I designed the website first, and I said, can you create me a CMS? And basically in the last 3 days, I've recreated Squarespace. And when I say that, obviously it's not as good as Squarespace. I've been going 20 years, but it's not far off it, and it's probably better than some other CMSs. And I had this kind of realization. This is my bullish side of AI, where I was like, yes, there's these few companies centralizing the technology. I do have a fear about that. But the technology is decentralizing the power of tech to small businesses. And actually what it's doing is crushing big businesses. There's this software apocalypse they're talking about, the SaaS apocalypse. And I see it because you can now build custom applications in days that run specifically how your business runs. And so any small business now, understanding Claude, can go and build any application they wanted that they couldn't have access to before because they weren't big enough. And so I'm seeing this kind of like decentralization of technology and the power of technology. And hopefully that will empower smaller businesses. I might be on my own here.
I don't think you are in Europe, but that's exactly how everyone needs to lean in for the next few years, because this is happening.
Yes.
Like there is like, if you want to waste an incredible amount of time, go and burn data centers and fight against this. And unless you can go off the grids and you're genuinely happy in that life and you've figured out your income, you figured out your assets, and you just want to escape, then fine. But virtually no one's in that position. But for everyone else, you've got no, and this is the power of the psyop, as it were. Everybody needs to lean in. There is no way you can fight it. You need to get excited about it. You need to utilize it. And you need to build everything you possibly can. And you need to help everyone make that transition, which is the arbitrage that's happening right now. There's an arbitrage between someone that's leaned in versus someone that hasn't figured out that they need to lean in. But maybe they know that they need to lean in and they just want someone to help them.
Yeah.
And so that is a massive opportunity. Like every single business in the world needs to make that transition.
Yeah, and I think this is empowering though for the small businesses, but I think it's going to be disempowering for some of the big businesses. I think the way, for example, I don't know, Blockbuster got destroyed by Netflix. Blockbuster didn't see it coming, and I think there's like one Blockbuster left or something now. They just refuse to embrace it. I think that's going to happen to a lot of massive software companies because people will not need the software. Because you can just write your own version. And it's always a pain with software. You have to shoe your business into their software. And maybe if you've got loads of money, you can get some customization. But really, you're always trying to adapt. And you've got all these disparate applications that do different things. I've just done it myself. I've integrated it all into our business workflow. And it's just going to change the way we work. Like it's blown my mind. We've created one for the podcast. So one of the problems we have with the podcast is the flow from researching a guest, to booking the guest, to recording it, to editing it, to publishing it. It is just a bunch of stuff in my head, Connor's head, the Chelsea's head, Kurt's head. In one day, I built an application to manage that. and we have the to-do list of every show broken down by person. It uses that Kanban design, so it just moves things across. And there are steps within there where AI saves us time. We're going to have less mistakes. We're going to be more powerful. We're going to make better shows. I built it in a day. Again, you come to me as when I've got my company and explain that system. I'm like, that's 3 to 4 months. That's probably 100 grand.
Yeah.
It's just so empowering.
Mm-hmm.
What I can't get my head around is who are the winners and losers? There's going to be a lot of losers. It's going to be a lot of losers. If you are in a job and your job is you go and sit at a desk and you've got a number of applications and you're interpreting data in one and then moving it into another, your job's going. You're done. You're cooked. And if you're at any kind of consultancy level where there's lots of you and you're not an AI native, you're going to be replaced by the AI native who can manage a group of agents who do. I've seen it now. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even to the point where I created so one of the things I find with Claude that was difficult, it forgets things that you've told it and just goes rogue. So I created like a spine, MD file of the important things it needs to remember. And then I created skills for all the different skills that would be in a web application business. So I had a front-end developer, back-end developer, designer, project manager, systems architect, security. I sent them all into a meeting yesterday. I was like, right, go into a meeting together. I mean, I'm just saying do that. I don't know what it does. But go into a meeting together, review the system and tell us what's not been done from your perspective, discuss it with the other agents, come back with the plan. And Claude says, we're all off into a meeting now. And I sit there for a few minutes, wait for it. Right, we're out of the meeting. It gave me a full document on everything that needs to be done. I gave that to the project manager to go and deliver. Simon, it's mind-blowing, but yeah. I think it's going to be volatile and a lot of people are going to be screwed.
Yeah, so I think you're an example of somebody, like, I think we're in a similar position. So I had a business. We were hiring people. At some stage, we decided, do I want to be in a business around this incredibly disruptive time? Or do we just want to invest and deploy capital? That was like a decision we had to make leading up to this. Then we decided, all right, we'll spin out part of our business, and we sold part of our business to Coinbase. Then we decided to keep the assets. And then the next decision was, okay, we need to have a hiring freeze. So we stopped hiring everybody, and we told everyone within our small team at this time, because the big team went somewhere else, but we were in a small team. So we kind of decentralized it down a bit, and part of our business consolidated into a bigger group. And then we were, okay, you're not going to lose your job, whatever happens, right? We had our core people that have been through us for a decade. You're not losing your job, whatever happens, but disrupt yourself.
Yes.
And we had that level of trust where we were like, look, we've got this assets, nothing's changing, we're making this amount of revenue. Just play with this technology and disrupt yourself, and we'll keep you on no matter what. Like, you'll be managing all of your agents and all of your things. And so a small team, we were able to do that, which is quite interesting in itself. And then what happened after that? Coinbase made an announcement saying that we're laying off X% of our team.
17%, wasn't it?
Something like that, like 15% or something like that. We're moving to a flat hierarchy, and we're building for AI first, and we're changing everything we do. And so, you've got a big business that needs to make that shift. Now, that public company, say Coinbase, is going to have a massive boost to productivity. They're going to lay off a bunch of people. There's an interesting one right now because of the business model of AI as well. Like, there's something I looked at recently where, because of the way that the token model, where the more you're using it, the more you pay in tokens, people calculated that it cost us more on the AI than it cost on the staff. So our cost actually increased.
I mean, that's not for me.
Yeah.
It's certainly not. I mean, I think I hit my first token limit with Claude the other day, and it said it was about 6 p.m, and I've become one of these AI vampires whereby I don't even truthfully, I don't even want to be talking to you now. I want to be sat there coding.
Yeah.
Everything I'm doing, I'm like, I want to finish my projects, right? I wake up in the middle of the night and it's 2 a.m. I go downstairs, get a water, and just go and see what the jobs my agents have finished and set them off on the next one.
Yeah.
Like, I'm continuous. But anyway, one evening at 6 o'clock, he said, "You've hit your token limit. It resets at 8 a.m." I was like, "What the fuck is this?
Yeah.
What do you mean?" And then I bought some additional tokens, and they wouldn't work straight away. And honestly, I was like, that was actually a warning signal to me, in that these companies can turn you off.
Yes.
And that is something that does worry me. And I do want to know what the decentralized version of this is, that you cannot be turned off. And maybe it can't. And maybe I'm a sucker. And maybe I'm building part of the matrix and we're all fucked.
Yeah. Well, ironically, the answer in that is in China.
Oh, God.
Because China's open sourcing it. And so America right now, we're certainly in an AI bubble in terms of valuations of the AI companies. Like 50% of the S&P is the Magnificent 7 companies. And we're about to add 3 more. So it'd be the Magnificent 10. We'll add SpaceX, OpenAI, and Anthropic.
Okay.
So we got 10 companies that are eating the S&P. And the only companies that are doing well right now have something in the ecosystem of the data center build out that's supporting them.
Didn't Anthropic just announce they just hit profitable EBIT for the first time, rolling profitable EBIT, 100 billion potentially rolling revenue? I mean, that's pretty quick to get to 100 billion revenue.
They are. And if you look at the NVIDIA numbers, we've got revenue, like margins, unbelievable margins right now. I think they also reported that they're doing a share buyback. I think $85 billion share buyback.
Who is?
NVIDIA.
Okay.
So that attracts that attracts all the growth tech investors. Then they also said that we're increasing our dividend from 1 cent to 25 cents.
Wow.
So now they're bringing in all the income investors, all the old Warren Buffett type of Coca-Colas and banking, those type of dividend income investors. So they got the income investors, they got the growth investors. They're propping up the private credit market. The private credit that's done okay is when it was in the AI data centers. That's the backbone. That all goes back into banking. We've got large venture capitalists like SoftBank. They've sold everything. And they've done a highly leveraged trade, $60 billion leveraged trade, connects to the Bank of Japan carry trade in order to purchase OpenAI shares pre-IPO. So we've set up this everything's on AI, definitely very reminiscent of the 2000 .com era. We've set up a game like that financially. And then structurally on the other side of this, we know that China is open sourcing everything.
I want to get into that, but I just want to hit on that point.
Yeah.
I think there's something very different from the bubble. So I got into the internet during the bubble. I was a student. I learned to code HTML on my lap. I was working in a Weatherspoons pub, getting paid £2.70 an hour. I put my name on a freelancers forum. I got a phone call 3 days later from eCountries.com, a .com thing. Phoned me up and they offered me £1,000 a week to go and work for them. I quit uni pretty much that day. I was like, oh, I'm done. But I worked through that period and we had so many issues with speed of the websites and them trying to do more than people were ready for as capable. And it came to, I think the internet came too soon for internet speeds. And it, and there was all that investment and nobody was making any money. Boo.com and pets.com all failed. I think there's a big difference here in that the internet is ready for AI and the revenues are there and they are growing. I mean, I think Anthropic said they're making 80% on tokens, 80% profit on tokens.
Yeah.
And so I think there is a difference in these business models can work. There's a huge amount of investment and there's surely a winner takes most on the super intelligence, but I do actually, I'm not worried about their business models.
Yeah, it's not the business model. It's what the investment banks are doing. It's what Goldman's is doing.
Go on.
So they're valuing these companies on astronomical growth on the current revenue model, and they're selling approximately 5 years forward revenue at this valuation. And so these valuations are
off the scale, and they require a few things.
Yeah, but hold on, isn't that just the game? I
No.
remember. No, well, wasn't it like Snapchat has never really made any money, but all the banks got rich on the IPO? Isn't that always been the game? Is that there's no money left for retail by the time it IPOs?
Yeah. I mean, well, that was what was moved towards. It used to be a game where you would try and have retail make some money.
Yeah, no, retail. We'd dump on retail.
But now it's like you got venture capital, you got private equity, then you got the private credit, then you got the Gulf sovereign, all the sovereign wealth funds, and then you've got the IPO. So the IPO is like the final game. Then you sell it 5-year revenue forward. I mean, if you're a long-term investor, it's like, the right place to allocate, which is why we ended up giving all our power to BlackRock, because you just end up buying the S&P instead.
Yeah.
And now they've changed the game where if you are valued at $1 trillion plus on day one, you get included in the index. So now,
SpaceX.
So now SpaceX is in, and I'm not sure if Anthropic and OpenAI are in, but there's probably something to learn there as we learn from it. But that puts you right in the index, because the stock market relies upon 3 things now. Money printing. If the money printer stops, the game stops. The passive index funds, which means BlackRock can determine who's in and who's out. The Fed can determine whether we print or not, when we rug pull, when we don't rug pull. And then finally, media, which is, what we were talking about earlier, like this, a narrative that gets all this investment, which right now we are leading up to. China's about to, we're going to lose the AI arms race if we don't get this investment, we don't do this IPO, we don't do it at these valuations.
Print a bunch more cash.
Yeah, print a bunch more cash. And you need something to justify the money printing, whether it's a 7 or 5 trillion, 10 trillion, whatever we're moving to next. You need to justify it. So you need a big narrative. And one of those narratives is, if you look at what's happening on the China side, DeepSeek was the first software company to receive funding from the infrastructure play of AI and technology that China's fund, the big fund. And it's never invested in software, but this is the first time it did, because it was integrated into Huawei's structure, and it can do 90% of 90%, maybe 1 year behind is kind of what people are saying of what's being released in America, but like at 1/10 of the cost.
Why is it able to do that? Is it just making different trade-offs?
Just different trade-offs, just different structures.
What's China up to here? What do you think?
Well, this, if we get into it, this goes into the one world government and what happened with the recent Xi Jinping and Trump meeting. There's a coordinated agenda there, I think, in terms of, we're told that it's China versus the private companies in America. But clearly, those magnificent 7 companies all build their shit in China. So the whole thing of the AI arms race is real, but at a higher level. I think there's a game that's being played, and I think that transitions us to this one world technocratic government agenda.
Are you a conspiracy theorist, Simon?
Well, I follow money, and if the conspiracy theory matches the money, then I go down it.
They keep coming true, man.
Yeah.
Does a one world government stop a world war?
I think it does, actually. Yes.
Yeah.
World War III. I always said this. I think I said it in the previous program. World War III is an absolute joke. It's a joke of a narrative, but it's what the media is pushing, and it's what the algorithm's trying to make you think will happen. Because within one phone call, if it was real, within one phone call, the entire US military industrial complex cannot produce a weapon without China. The entire US military industrial complex needs the supply chain of China, as does the entire US tech sector. So World War III is not possible. So why are we continually being told that we're going to World War III? Well, to me, there has to be a bigger agenda.
Well, I mean, they already have weapon stockpiles. They already have nuclear weapons. They can fire them. You're talking about
I'm taking nuke out of the equation. Like, that's end of world shit.
Yeah, but I mean, that to me is the only World War III. Everything else is proxy wars in little shitty nations that we don't care about, where we're happy to just drop bombs on innocent people.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that's how I guess. But when we get back to the AI stuff, so DeepSeek raised at about 45 billion valuation, and we're looking at everything else in the under $1 trillion or up to $2 trillion with SpaceX. The entire economy of US growth last year, if you took out the data center build, was nothing. Like it was a useless economy. We also know that there is a currency war. That's certainly one of the most interesting things that are happening right now as an alternative to World War III, like an actual physical war, I think. But that's always been every single war. There was always a currency war before the war.
Mm-hmm.
That's always been the number one tool. We know that we're moving down this whole programmable money, programmable securities, programmable everything. And that's kind of where we are right now in the world, I'd say.
Where do you see us in 5 years? What does the world look like in 5 years? Like, is this something all this change that's happening, is it going to happen fast?
I think it is happening fast, yeah. So I think the future of America is all the growth is coming from the AI and the data centers. That's where it is right now. The S&P, like tech is eating the S&P. There is a moment when the data centers are built. Then what happens?
We don't need any more.
Yeah. Well, there's not enough energy in the world to power all this AI. So either what we're doing is unsustainable, or there's a new model, and the new model eliminates everything that everyone's investing right now. China's already got it. They've got the whole solar panel, renewable energy, electric vehicles, batteries, rare earth minerals, like that whole supply chain, which is why Tesla needs China to make Teslas. That whole supply chain is there. But what is the stock market, which is now pretty much dependent upon the success of these IPOs that are about to happen. If they're a sell the rumor, buy the rumor, sell the news event, and there was a real structural correction after these IPOs and it was a rug pull, and what SoftBank is doing, it leads to a dump.
What do you think?
I'm really split between it. This is why I think they're timing the opening of the Strait of Hormuz with the IPOs. So I think Trump wants to make sure that liquidity is there. And so it's kind of on, off, open, closed, open. I reckon they've already signed a memorandum of understanding. We're getting back and forth this weekend as we speak.
Ready for the...
they already signed it in May. Like, I think they've already signed it.
All ready for the midterms.
I don't think midterms matter that much.
I think psychologically they matter.
I think Trump knows that he's fulfilled his task. He's split the world into multipolarity.
He's done his job.
He's made a shit ton of money. He's effectively laid the foundation for killing everything that propped up the dollar. All of the deep state operations, all of the USAID, all of the datas over to Palantir, Department of Government Efficiency, all of the reputation of America with Epstein files, everything that was covert before that propped up the dollar is now overt. And then you had the event that sets the new world order, which is if America can't open the Strait of Hormuz, then you have the Suez Canal moment of the British Empire. And it's obvious that that's what's happening right now. So right now, I think Trump needs a Hollywood movie of how he forced Iran into signing a deal. And I think Iran will agree to that in the negotiations. You get your Hollywood movie. Then we'll have this moment when everyone else in the world realizes Iran did it. Can we do that? Can we now sign with China? Can we now do the Belt and Road Initiative? And can we actually get rid of our IMF debt? Seems like there's a way now. It seems like there's a path. How do we do that? Well, we need to deconstruct all of the things that made sanctions possible. We need to deconstruct the SWIFT system for the rest of the world. We need to take away the layers that propped up the petrodollar, which is OPEC. People see it as
who just left OPEC? Didn't someone just leave OPEC?
UAE just left
Yeah.
OPEC, and they got an FX swap line. And what that means in simple terms is the way the Eurodollar system works is that if you get access to the Federal Reserve FX swap lines, which is where you deposit your currency and they lend you dollars and the Fed creates those dollars, it's handing over the creation of dollars to an alternative central bank. And so that's an exclusive club. That was for the Bank of Japan, the European Central Bank, the Bank of England, the Bank of Canada, and the Swiss Central Bank. Now, an FX swap line was given to UAE. That means that UAE can now create dollars. And so if they want to, have the guarantee of the Federal Reserve System, but within UAE, and who are UAE? They're the center of circumventing sanctions globally. Iran does all of their trade through UAE, and we're meant to believe they're at war right now. But all of the sanction circumvention happens via UAE, via Hong Kong, via Singapore, and all of the gold to oil routes. And what else did UAE get? Well, so we've got an FX swap line, so it now can have a system that's guaranteed by the Federal Reserve, and that was framed as, UAE's in so much distress, they're about to die, and we bailed them out. They've got $250 billion in reserves and $2 trillion of US assets. And the average American is struggling with the cost of energy because of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Their bills are going through the roof, and they're meant to believe that they're bailing out UAE. What else did it get? So then it came out of OPEC. OPEC was the other half of the petrodollar. It was the agreement by the International Monetary Fund, the post-World War II Bretton Woods order, where you would take your dollars that you priced in oil, so you would sell your oil for dollars, and then you would reinvest them into US treasuries. But the bit that most people don't know is that then it sticks within the Federal Reserve System, so they can sanction them or wipe them away. That gives America its control. And then what you have to do with the yield on the treasuries, you have to reinvest it in US companies. And so your defense contract was you have to spend it into the US stock market. Then it comes back with US companies getting contracts, and they build a foreign base. And then they say, we'll protect the petrodollar.
It feels like things are breaking apart, but it actually sounds like they're consolidated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now, you've broken the petrodollar.
Yeah.
The petrodollar no longer has that system. What else did UAE get? It just so happens that the Bank for International Settlements was creating a network of central bank digital currencies called Enbridge. That Enbridge project was transferred over to UAE. And UAE have a network of central bank digital currencies that connect Saudi Arabia, China, Thailand, and UAE, and Hong Kong. Then we got an announcement from Hong Kong just the last few weeks that Hong Kong is now taking on the infrastructure of the gold clearing system for derivative products that used to be in London. And so now Hong Kong is starting to get the ability to issue these gold derivatives that aren't backed by physical gold, i.e. the same scam that happened in the West. And it's integrated into China's, the Shanghai gold market. And so there's another thing that's built up here. You've got a network of CBDCs that plug into China's CBDC, all clearing via UAE. They've all got their system there. You've got the petrodollar that is now what happened 11 months prior to UAE leaving OPEC. They signed an energy pricing agreement with BRICS. And so Now you've got this, and what is the end result of the closure
Yeah.
of the Strait of Hormuz? Iran, who's the largest sovereign Bitcoin miner in the world, that mines Bitcoin at the cheapest rate in the world, backed by nuclear energy. We're meant to be negotiating nuclear weapons, when in the end they're going to have, for the first time, a capitulation on their ability to have a nuclear, civilian nuclear energy program. And then when you remove sanctions, which is what's being negotiated, what happens then? Well, you've got 2 to 4 million barrels of oil for an OPEC member, because Iran is in OPEC. Now that's moving all over to BRICS. Who joined BRICS right prior, like a year prior to this? UAE, Iran, and Egypt. Saudi did a holdout and said, we'll be an observer. And then what did we get? We had October the 7th. Then the IMF bribed Egypt and said, we'll cancel your $18 billion debt if you ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. Egypt said no.
That's a big claim.
That's exactly what happened. This is like the plans were all released. The whole ethnic cleansing, the plan was to put all of the Palestinians in the Sinai Desert and then expand the war into Egypt.
Well, so I'm aware of that.
Yeah.
When you say ethnically cleanse,
That ethnically cleanse doesn't mean genocide.
Yeah, no, it
means
also
you take
means
the Palestinians
yeah,
and put
move
them
them
somewhere else.
Yeah,
you move them, expel them,
Yeah.
Nakba, or whatever. So that was what they were meant to do. But then prior to that, what happened? China normalized between Iran and Saudi Arabia. You had all those trade agreements. UAE was doing all the trade flows for all the sanctions circumvention. You had all these gold markets. You had gold that was completely flowing out of the west and into the east. When you look at all these flows, you had Egypt that decided, they took GCC, they took Gulf country money, and they took China Belt and Road Initiative money, and they stopped taking IMF money. And then they didn't accept the ethnic cleansing. And then we had this whole tit for tat between UAE and Iran. We also had a tit for tat between UAE and Saudi Arabia. Good cop, bad cop, good cop, bad cop. And what did they all destroy? They destroyed the infrastructure of the American bases. And they destroyed energy infrastructure, very specifically and very targeted.
So do you see this all like Neo sees the Matrix? Do you just see it all?
I see, yes. I mean, to me, this is an alternative to World War III, which is that world leaders, recognizing that World War III can't happen, they negotiate better outcomes. And who is the world leader in the West? Well, I've already said in previous episodes, that's private corporate interest.
Yes.
That's military industrial complex, financial industrial complex, technical industrial complex. So when you go to a meeting between Xi Jinping and Trump, what happens? You get the executives of all the banks, the FIC, you get the executives of all the technology companies, the TIC, and they sit down for a check-in report with Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party on how they're splitting up the world and how these new energy routes are moving us to this multipolar world while they build out an AI center with a few rug pulls built in. And this is what I'm trying to say. The rug pulls that are built into this, how was the Belt and Road Initiative funded? It was funded by selling US treasuries. So they went from China's position went 1.4 trillion down to 650 billion now. All of that was invested in the countries that built all the alternative routes, all the train routes, the port routes, the shipping routes, all the alternative, was all built out. And so you can see that everything's been split up. And then we get a very interesting sequence of events. Nord Stream pipeline's blown up. That subordinates Europe. Europe and Germany, forces them into LNG contracts. Renewable energy. What's renewable energy? It's all powered by electricity. So Europe, doubles down into its renewable energy. We get Nord Stream pipeline. We get Ukraine war, Russia war. What happens with Venezuela? You could see before Venezuela, the Iran assets were being moved, the Russian assets were being moved. China was building up all of its oil reserves, and it was allowed to happen. We also had the same happen in Syria. Iran allowed it to happen. Russia allowed it to happen. China allowed to have it happen.
Okay, I've got a question. So what's happening with Cuba? What's that part of it?
Well, the Western Hemisphere is Mick, Fick, and Tick owned.
Yeah.
And so an energy crisis is needed. So you choke off all of its oil supply with Venezuela. You then do a beta test for crimes against humanity and people not being able to go to hospitals, people not being able to travel. If you want energy in Cuba, you have to download an app and it will give you your allocation. You probably have your carbon credit score, and you destroy the currency and you agree with Russia and China. Is this Mick, Fick, and Tick's part of the world? They'll say, well, I want Ukraine, I want Taiwan. They split the world up. They agree what's going to happen.
China's getting Taiwan.
China's getting Taiwan, which is why they're building the infrastructure for chip independence. So you get an investment in Intel. You get Biden that signed the CHIPS agreement. So you invest $50 billion in chip infrastructure and independence. This is multi-government. You can see it from Trump to Biden to Trump. They're
like, don't take Taiwan yet. Let's build out our fabs.
China's getting close to chip independent, and America's going to be building their chip independence, and then Taiwan's just not that important.
What happened to Thomas Massey? Is that a side gig?
Thomas Massey, so he was taken down by the Israeli lobby.
Yeah, definitely.
There is a faction of power that is still the old neocons, the radical Zionists in Israel, and even factions of the IRGC that create the strategic tension that justifies all the war in the Middle East. That circle, neocons in America, the funding of resistance that justifies war, and Israel always pretending that they're about to be taken out and you need to protect the Jews. So they build an army, they get population growth, and they expand and justify wars, destabilize. That faction is, I would say, the power faction aligned with the military-industrial complex, which is more nationalistic. That's like the boomers that remember the dollar's old day. The financial industrial complex is more global. It's transnational. It's sovereign wealth funds. It's China. It's Goldman Sachs. It's JP Morgan. It's all that transnational capital. So they're global in nature. They're like the globalists, let's call them. And then you've got the technical industrial complex is the one world government. And so you've got what you're seeing here with all of these wars is a Mick, Fick, and Tick military financial technology. They're taking all of America's assets and they're building them in all of these different centers. And so that's the multipolarity movement away from making the dollar less relevant, but asset stripping as you're taking away the dollar, putting all the value into the stock market, fiscal dominance, rolling over the debt, quantitative easing, the AI narrative you need to manufacture a pump and dump cycle, everything you need there.
Is this just the way the world works? Like, is it like, don't be a baby. This is the way the world works. Suck it up.
This is the way the world has always worked. There was the British Empire was the Dutch East India, the British East India Company, the Bank of England, the government taking on the debt, and the people that needed to buy into a narrative. That's the British Empire. Steal all the assets, steal all the resources, manufacture war until you've taken all the assets, and then hand over to a new empire, which was the American Empire.
We just have newer technologies to do it with, but it's exactly the same.
Exactly the same. Before it was ships, now it's artificial intelligence.
Okay, so then what does that mean for the average Joe? Just a normal guy who's finding life getting more expensive. Is like, this is just the reality of life. The money, we don't have trickle down, we have trickle up.
Yes.
All that happens is money is going to get extracted from you through purchasing power, and you've got to find a way of, I don't know, a life that works for you.
Yeah.
It's a big club and you're not in it.
Well, okay. So examples of things that have worked. Firstly, you vote with your money. Politics is gone. Like if you're wasting time on politics, I think you're wasting vital energy.
That's literally half my life, man.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I find it interesting because I only really looked at politics once I'd already made it. Like, and I do think that the politics isn't. I think it's a waste of time. I really do think it's a waste of time for most people. You need to build for yourself, and it starts with you and your family and your community, and that's like where you need to build outwards. And
you've got to understand the game, the system, and build within that.
The things to understand about the system is that capital is to subordinate you. So if you take on debt, it's because you are the product of someone else. Someone else is you are the asset of someone else, and you are the product, right? So when you take it on, you have to have a very clear reason why you're taking it on, and it better make you more money than the interest you're paying. And it better lead to an asset that gets you ahead of the game, or just don't touch it. If you are selling shares in your company, it's subordination to whoever's buying those shares, and it moves as a spectrum until finally you're a public company and you are the system. So these are capital is subordination. Is there a way that you can utilize all the things that you talked about with AI to really do the opposite of what Silicon Valley and the American and British American empire would tell you to do? So they'll tell you that you got to build a ginormous company, become a public company, employ lots and lots of people. It starts with venture capital, then it goes to PE, then it goes to public offering. Can you just build a micro business given the fact that you can utilize all these AI tools? And can you avoid the subscription services to the extent possible by building stuff? Now, you start with the subscriptions, but then maybe you replace them one at a time.
You will end choices.
Go for it.
The two choices are it's kind of blue pill, red pill, right?
Yeah.
You take the blue pill, you're subordinate to that system. You can have a great life within it if you manage to somehow beat the inflationary trap. Or you become a sovereign, and then you're outside of the system, and you can probably find happiness in both. I mean, there's a lot of people subordinate to a system that don't think about it like you do, that would listen to a podcast like this and go, well, he's just fucking crazy. This is not true. That's not like who I vote for will change my life. And
yeah.
The world will get better. And go to work, and then they earn their wage, they collect their pension, and then die. And they might be perfectly happy with that. And then there's a few of us that look at this and go, "This is shit."
Yeah, but it's not working. You can see on the macro that what looks like happiness.
Oh, I think this country's depressed.
Exactly, I agree.
I think we have got large-scale national depression.
Yeah,
I think we're having a rise of both left-wing and right-wing populism. And
that's the same in America, by the way.
Yeah, of course.
So even if you've got here's the capitalist system, and then let's say European and UK has kind of been a fallen empire, and we know what it's like. We're a bit more skeptical. The Americans are still holding on to, we rule the world. Look, Trump is kicking ass, stealing all the oil. We're going to win. Like, we got the oil, everyone else is going to die. Like, if you still got a bit of that in you, you're still looking at the statistics across America, and it is an absolute pandemic in terms of how people are.
So, in some ways, the anti-capitalist socialists have got a point in that this is an ugly system. It's okay if you want to play it. Some people want to play the game; they're happy to play the game, but it's an ugly system that needs a lot of subordinate people. And I've been like shouting, we need free market capitalism, and it's like, we're never going to get it. So do we need a new term? Do we need sovereign capitalism?
Maybe we do need a new term, but I completely reject that the Ricardian banksters that created the economic psyop, that indoctrinated our education system in order to create a science called economics that took out the most important thing, which is the foundation of money, and built a nation of investment bankers and central bankers and FIC employees that all are preserving the system, had anything useful to tell us in the first place. And that whole capitalism versus communism was a psyop to justify war. And it was funded by the same bankers. People think of like, oh, China and Russia, communism was a creation of the East. Like, communism was a creation of the West. Communism was created, communism and capitalism and socialism was a construct and words and labels put on models that are completely disjointed from reality. I know I spent 4 years studying them. And it wasn't until I left there that I understood actually how economics works. And these labels of capitalism, communism are completely designed to create another left and right paradox to make you think that the solution is to keep changing the system. But in the end, it's the money. Like, you started in the right place, the What Bitcoin Did podcast. Yeah. It is the money that determines, and capitalism and communism and socialism are designed to feed the same central banking system. And they came from the same place.
But we can agree that communism is the worst model, the most dysfunctional economic model. Can we not agree there?
I think communism and the version of capitalism built on central banking leads to the same result.
What result is that?
The result is the concentration of power upwards. One happens faster, one happens slower.
Sure, but is one 1984 and one is Brave New World? Like, do we get Brave New World in capital society?
One is ruled by government, the other is ruled by companies, ruled by banks.
Sure, but in the more
and in the banks version, you don't know who's in charge.
But in the capitalist version, we do get the creation of more wealth and prosperity and productivity, and those productivity gains do disseminate down to society, and even the poorest people have got laptops and mobile phones, and like, no one really goes hungry in this country. Sure, and it's worth pointing out, and I'm not minimizing it, there are kids whose parents cannot feed them probably the 3 meals they want, but generally speaking, no one in this country is starving to death. It doesn't happen, whereas it would have historically. But in communist societies, we have had people starve to death. We've had tens of millions. Like, can we not recognize that?
Yeah, absolutely. But let's not look at the extremes, because they never are what they say. Like, the communist model is never communism, and the capitalist model is never capitalism. Look at the country. So, as a country, you have resources, and you have ways of allocating those resources. And where there is a deficit, you have to go to another country and you have to build a partnership in order to figure out how to solve that. There are models that came from economics that were specifically designed to subordinate and steal resources from other countries. And they called it capitalism, they called it neoliberalism, they called it IMF loans, they called it whatever they want to call it. But it was a mechanism for ensuring that your resources come to us and we get to build product from it. And by building product from it, we get the margin and we get to sell it back to you, but we lend you the money in order to buy it back from us. And then you have starvation, but you send us your food. You know, this was not an accident. That was a deliberate model of ensuring that they could never, the price of goods is going up, but the commodities are effectively giving you less and less margin. So you get poorer and poorer and poorer if you're just selling your commodities and not manufacturing something. Now, the countries that didn't manufacture, it wasn't because they thought communism was a good idea. Because if you look at China, the communism was funded by the Soviet Union. Where did the Soviet Union come from? That was the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks was to take away capitalism from Russia because Russia had the right model, which was a mix of using your resources to ensure, and Singapore's the best model. I've always thought Singapore's the best model in the world. Singapore, when it decolonized, said, before we go, and I told Bekele this when I went to El Salvador as well, before we do this, they made sure that there was a program that all the local Singapore people would end up with their houses and land. The opposite of what they did in Hong Kong. And if you go to Hong Kong, I lived there for years. You go underground. I went under there. There are coffin box houses of the local Cantonese that were shoved underground in tunnels and pushed out to the islands, while all the largest population of billionaires own all the real estate. You would call that capitalism. In Singapore, they said, no, we're going to make sure that you have a program that you end up with your real estate and you end up with your land. And they did that before they grew. And they made sure they pushed everyone into it. Some would call that socialism. They pushed everyone into it. And even in China, 95% of people own their land and real estate. Then they became, in Singapore, they felt like they were shareholders. Imagine if that was done in El Salvador, right? Imagine if, before inviting all the wealthy Bitcoiners in, you made sure that every Salvadorian had a program where they would end up with the benefits of the increase in the property price and land price as El Salvador transforms itself. Instead of now having the wealthy Bitcoiners come over and take over all the land and buy everything, and create the next Hong Kong, you actually implemented a little bit of what's right. And we've always seen this. You can see this in capitalism, right?
Oh, hold on. Isn't that what the guy wanted to do in Honduras? I can't remember his name.
Yes, and what happens to them? They always get assassinated.
Assassinated, and they went to war with El Salvador.
Okay. The story of every single war in the world is when someone tried to do that. They said, "What's Iran's biggest? What's the thing that they've done that was the crime that was unforgivable?" They nationalized their oil and said, "We want to do what Saudi does. We want our oil to mean that you pay no tax, and then you can all create capitalism and create as many companies, and we don't need to tax you." And that's why every country you go through, every single war, it's someone tried to use their resources or tried to distribute their assets in a way where they couldn't be given at complete with no margin to the West. And that's every war. So if you can
we're the
fix
bad
that one-
guys.
I think the people are also victims of the same system.
Sure.
Victims is not the right word. There is a subordination network and it serves the central banking system. And the Dutch created it, the British created it, and we put it in America. And it was designed to produce exactly what we're getting. And it created all the wars and made sure that people were in a constant state of poverty so that we could have their resources by design, deliberately. Now, the people were the product. We became debt slaves. And we either figured out how to use debt in order to own real estate so that we could get on the right side, and you became one of the boomers that actually kind of beat the system, but you worked for the bank, right? So you either become part of the system, and who are the ones right now that are just saying, just print, just QE, just get those stocks up, just I'll let my children have my house. I'll inherit.
Juice it, baby.
Yeah, just please don't break anything.
Yeah,
just don't break anything. It's the people that were co-opted into the system where all their wealth, and I'm just about to retire. I need that pension's got
Juice
like
it.
2 million, 3 million,
just juice it for me, man.
Yeah. And the kids are just saying, "Oh man, just crash it. I just want to buy a house. Just crash it. Like I want to buy it." And they're like, "No, don't worry, you're gonna have it." And then the government says, "Well, I'm gonna tax it, and we're gonna inherit and tax it, and then we're gonna store a wealth tax to make you sell it." And then we're going to tell BlackRock that they can buy it because they can create a corporate structure where they don't have to pay the tax.
Or we're going to create an exit tax. So you just have to stay here and suck it up, motherfucker.
Yeah. And build your business based upon, and you look at every restaurant across, they just work for the bank. They just work for the landlord.
Dude, I went out in London recently. Bear in mind, I used to work down here. I had my advertising agency in Covent Garden. And when you work in advertising and you run the company, you have a lot of meals out. And during that period, we're talking 14, 15 years ago, London was busy. You could not get into Hawksmoor in Covent Garden on the day. Just wouldn't happen, right? Anyway, I had a night out in London the other day. It was a Thursday night. and I went to an Italian restaurant, and it was half full. Now, this is a good Italian restaurant that's used to be probably full on a Tuesday. Half full. Service was crap. The meal was 350 quid for 2 people. We had a bottle of Prosecco. Okay, 350 quid. I was like, that's interesting. Went to Opium for a drink afterwards down in Chinatown. There's these 2 like different bars, Opium and the Experimental Cocktail Bar. They're the kind of place where there's just a door and you only know about it if you know about it. And there's a guy at the door and you say, used to turn up at these and you say, can I come in? They go, have you got a booking? You say, no, you can't get it. Now you just turn up and you get in. 3 floors are over. Go in now. Only 1 floor is open. 8 people were in there. We had 4 cocktails and it was 115 quid for 4 cocktails. I was like, that's expensive. Then went to, where did I go after that? Ronnie Scott's. Ronnie Scott's used to be my favourite place to go. I never used to go and watch jazz shows. I used to go to the upstairs where it was kind of like a bar, but more of a disco, and you'd have random stuff. A guy reading poetry or I don't know, like a random band playing, and it would be packed. There'd be 80, 100 people in there all night. They've refurbed it. They spent 4 million, I think, on a refurb, and they've made it like downstairs, so it's a proper like little amphitheatre. It's beautiful what they've done. 15 people are in there. And that evening, I reckon, 350, I spent about 600-700 quid. Yeah, it's a big night out without being a big night out. You know, like normally you plan a big night out, a hotel and things. That's a night that would have cost me, back when I used to work here, 300 quid.
Yeah.
So I can't believe the amount of money I've spent.
Yeah.
Everywhere's half full or empty.
Yeah.
Everything's really expensive. There's no rich young, because London was propped up by rich young people.
Yeah.
They're not out. They're not doing things. I was like, London's cooked.
Yeah.
We're done.
Yeah. And think what, like, let's bring it back down to that. So what are the 3 things that the Strait of Hormuz closure did? Well, it created food price inflation off the scale.
Yep.
So that was the second one was energy. And then it stopped the possibility of rate cuts. And so you create an inflationary spiral that then requires rate hikes.
No one can make any money at the moment.
So think about the average person. You got food, interest, and energy.
Yeah.
So you've wiped all them out.
Yes.
And you know, the people at the top, well, yeah, I don't care what you charge me. I'll pay for it. I'll complain about it, but I'll pay for it.
But there's like a lack of disposable income is hollowing out the country. This is why I think the country's depressed. A lot of people unemployed. People just, what's the point in working now?
Yeah.
You know, surely there's an end state where they go, hold on, how subordinate can we create this country?
Yeah.
Or is it just no choice? You're like, you don't have a choice. You've got to live. You've got to, basically, you've got to live. So you've got to go to work and you need to, you know, feed yourself and warm your home, whatever. But you're not going to have a holiday and fuck you because, like, all right, go die.
Well, they want you to either be homeless, which means you're useless to them at this stage. You don't have a dress, you can't take on debt, you're no longer useful to us. Or they need you, your job pays the maximum amount in interest, in energy, and in food. Ideally just interest, and you pay the rest through more debt. Or you give us all your money and we manage it for you.
And angry enough to keep voting.
Yes, and then you need to create the fake enemy. You know, originally it was the communists, and I'm not saying that communists aren't an enemy. It's a horrible ideology. But it was the same, created by the same people. So you have the communist energy. When that got too tired, you created the terrorists. When the terrorists got too tired, you created the immigrants. And so that's the narrative. It's the radical lefts, it's the far rights, mix them all up, put them in a pot, fund people to lead movements, that use algorithms in order to galvanize them, build their social credit score, and you've got them all looking at the wrong enemy. And really, it is a systemic system of subordination that our governments, you know, even just focusing on the government, you got to go, once you get a layer above government, pretty much everything makes sense. And that's That was the aha moment for me.
So right, okay. So Keir Starmer, yeah, his worth is gone. We're going to get in Andy Burnham's going to be allowed to come in, who's going to raise capital gains tax to be level with income tax, and he's going to do a wealth tax, and he's just going to extract more money.
Yeah. Or you get the other far right side, which will say, guess what? It's the immigrants. It's the Muslims. We're going to have a white nationalist movement. And then you get a civil war. And then they engineer that. The MI6 will make that happen.
We're so fucked.
Yeah. So then you go, what's the layer up? The layer up is you vote with your money. And that's where the change happens. So what is your job now? Your job is to recognize the system as it is.
What is my job now? Right now, Mr. Podcast Man.
It's difficult, right? Because I think this is my analysis, and you can tell me whether I'm wrong. So you started on the Bitcoin side. You figured everything out about Bitcoin. It put you in a position where you can observe this system without being subordinate to it. Then you covered all the scams and psyops and alternatives and got everyone away from the bad behavior. Then we have the Wall Street takeover. You end up having to sponsor some central. I went through the same journey.
Yeah, it's like this is your life.
Yeah. Then you realize, okay, you have to support a bit of that, but hopefully everyone gets the Bitcoin in self custody in the end. Then you realize this is boring. How many times can I talk about Bitcoin? I think we figured this shit out now, how it works. And
a little bit of that, but a little bit of like, oh, now I see how the system works. I want to go back and throw some hand grenades into it and try and fix it.
Yeah. And that's that place we talked about in the beginning.
Yeah.
Which is wealth, influence, podcast, traffic, wealth, FU money, and the ability to sit down with people and actually have the conversations that you're not meant to have. And so I think you're on track.
I'm on track.
I think you're on track. But at some point, I feel like we're in a situation where I think the actions that everyone takes for the next 5 years is really going to define them. And I think you're right. The understanding how the system works is really depressing, and it can take you to a really dark place. Yeah. But that dark place has to go to the next level where you're like, right, I understand how it works. I know the rules. I'm not distracted with what they want me to focus on. So how do we help as many people as possible manage this transition? Which is, I think you're saying, Simon, we've done 2 podcasts on the really crazy shit. You're either, people believe you at this stage or they don't. You're either a wacky conspiracy theorist or you figured it out. Or you're somewhere in the middle and everyone's got their own opinion based upon their own backgrounds, their own experiences. This is the best of my thinking. But once you you can break it down to pretty simple rules, which is lean into the whole world. The whole monopoly board is being thrown up by, I believe, an agenda to build a police and surveillance state of programmable money, social credit scores, and artificial intelligence. Right. It is what it is. You're not going to stop it. It is what it is. So what do we do with that? Well, we try to figure out the decentralized version. Maybe that happens. Maybe it doesn't. But in the meantime, we need to make as much money from this AI thing as possible.
Have I talked to you about the golden pill?
No.
Okay. So I arrived in the world of Bitcoin blue pilled and just ran into a world of people with ideas who'd read books I'd never heard of Hayek. I didn't even know what libertarianism was. I didn't know what central banks, what they did. I just didn't know any of this. I ran in blue pilled into a wall of red pilled people to go, you're a fucking idiot. How do you not know this? I was like, I don't know it. I'm just a moron from Bedford who started a podcast because I bought some Bitcoin. And then I became red pilled. I was like, I really understand this system. And then before I went red-pilled, I went white-pilled. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do some good. Ran into a wall of bureaucracy and bullshit and lies and reality that I couldn't do anything about. Then I went super black-pilled. I got dark. And I actually lost my motivation. And I've been, ever since, Simon, I was I could deliver a newspaper. I've worked. And I didn't just have one paper round, I had 3 paper rounds, and I got a job in a shop. And then about 18, I was like, make me the manager. And then I went to uni and I quit, started building websites. And then I started an agency. And like I've done okay, not super successful, but the agency had 40 people. Then I did that and I started a podcast. I'm going to make it the biggest podcast. Like I've never stopped working and putting the hours in. And over the last year, I lost all my motivation. I did. I used to get up at 6 in the morning, work all day. I'd be getting up at 7, 8, drop the kid off at school, go to the gym. Probably start work about 10:30, do 5 hours. I can't be bothered. Cook dinner. I was quite happy, really happy with it. And then when this AI thing, I've got my mojo back, and I'm again getting back up at 6. I'm working 14, 15, 16 hours. I can build something. I can see something. And somebody said to me, it's like, you've been through all this. You've done the black pill. You need the golden pill. It's like, what's the golden pill? It's like, that is kind of your hope. That is you. That's you. You've had every pill. You know how it works. You know how the system works. And you have a choice of blue pill, but you don't want to do it. You've understood through the red pill. You've had your depressing black pill moment. You've had your white pill. Now it's like the golden pill is like, this is reality, and I'm going to build my world in it. Yeah. That's it. And I like that idea.
I'm going to use that. I think I'm in the golden pill.
You are in the golden. Like I'm behind you. Like every time I talk to you, I go, me and Connor get in the car and we go and we're like, fuck this. We should do what we want. We should. And then I just get sucked back in a little bit.
Yeah.
Get sucked back in a little bit. But I have got my mojo back with this AI thing. And I want people to know about AI like I want them to know about Bitcoin. I'm like, you should know about Bitcoin and you should be buying Bitcoin and you should be protecting yourself and understanding the system. But also you should be building with AI, because I do think what's going to happen is this. It's like a gold rush, really. Like I've got an idea for a company. I'm not going to tell you it, but I've got an idea for a company. It doesn't exist. I can build it. If you'd asked me to do this like 5 years ago, we're like, well, I need to go to Andreessen Horowitz. I need to ask for $10 million and give away 30% of my business and then find a tech director. And, in 3 months we'll have a MVP and, go on that journey. I can build this entire product on my own in a week.
This is the golden pill.
Yeah.
And so the golden pill is, who's important to me? Who do I want to spend my time with? Like, we were shamed. The Silicon Valley culture shamed people for building out a family business. It was, no, you need to take the funding. You need to take Silicon Valley. You need to go down this path, and you can have 5% of $1 billion the or you can have 100% of a company that goes bust, right? That was like the whole thing.
But you'll get your Ferrari and your hot chicks. And
the people that I meet right now is the people that are in that. Okay, I've got a thank God I didn't get there. Thank God I didn't hire 7,000 people. Like, thank God I haven't got that massive infrastructure and I'm trying to deal with HR and figuring out how to change this. And so that's it. There is a global agenda to take us to the most centralized version of control grid that the world that will ever see. And even if it happens, which I believe it will, even if it happens, it doesn't matter if you're sovereign. And so let's get back to what's the root of being sovereign. Well, it's actually a small business with a family, and you're supporting the people that are most important to you. And I get to say, I can go to my brother-in-law and say, work for us, disrupt yourself with AI, and we'll carry on. I'm not going to let you go. You'll have an income for life.
It's like we spend that all of our life running towards this imaginary goal, and some of us hit it, right? Yeah. And you hit it, and you go, "Oh, nothing changed."
Yeah.
And I kind of see. Look, I am working my balls off again, but I kind of see happiness as slowing down time, and you slow down time when you stop chasing things.
But I never stopped the working my ass off. I just changed what I was working on.
Yeah.
So there was a moment when I was like, okay, I've done the career thing. I've done the business thing. I've done the investing thing. But then I just started working my ass off on content with no real purpose other than I just wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And then it was like, okay, you know what? That sounds like a good idea. I definitely can't be bothered to do that. But if you want to do it, let's do it.
Mm.
And that's kind of where I am right now. And then, yeah, to have the ability of all the things that you said to actually be able to do this with like on your own with all these services using AI for all of the things. And it, you know, even when I was trying to figure out how the world worked, like I was just deep into studying every war and figuring out what happened there and what was the real story. But the working never stopped. And this is kind of where you enter into an overarching philosophy. And I found my overarching philosophy, which helped me, which is that life, you don't fix the world. Like we always enter into, right, we're going to fix everything. We're going to get to this utopia, right? And suddenly we're going to enter into this golden age or whatever. I don't think that's what life is. I think that life is, and I always call it a test. And the test is, I'm going to throw you some of the most evil shit and the most amazing shit. And you're either going to lean into it and become more evil or more good. And you have to define what this good and evil thing is. And you know in your soul, in your soul, what that is. Because when you do bad shit, you know it internally that you weren't meant to do that. I can talk about many, many moments when I was doing things that I knew internally that wasn't the right thing to do. But I managed to create a narrative in my head that that's the right thing to do in order to allow me to do it. So
you still do it at all?
I think I've codified what I think good and evil is, and I know what activities I shouldn't do and what should do, and I know that I do activities that I shouldn't do that I internally struggle with, that I haven't been able to resolve in myself.
Because there is a certain, yes, it's a test.
Yeah,
but there's a privilege of money that allows you to stop, breathe, and actually make those decisions. You can see how, the endless bad decisions people make on that philosophical scale. Because, I mean, what would be a great example? I don't know. Somebody who works at a newspaper writes a shitty headline about someone's personal life because they want to get up that career ladder, and so they do that article. They write that headline. Or even us. I'm gonna. What is the title for this show that gets the most people in to watch it? Mm-hmm. Is it the right title, or is it is it a dishonest title? The one that comes to my mind is "This is how the world works." Mm-hmm. That's quite an honest title. It's just saying this is the way the world works. If we put out 3 titles with test, "This is how the world works," or "You're fucked and going to be poor," and "You're fucked and going to be poor" is going to work better. Do I leave that on? Even though it depresses people, gives them no hope, sends them in with the wrong mindset. Like, these are the little choices. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're definitely. And sometimes you're conflicted because there's not a good answer, right? You're like, well, if I give it this title, then I'm only going to help this number of people. If I give it that title, I'm going to help a lot more people.
That's what AI said. He said, advertise a juicy cheeseburger and then deliver a fillet steak. Said, that's the game you got to play. But there's loads of those decisions that happen every single day, and some of them I think you make them in autopilot, but the world incentivizes a lot of bad decisions sometimes.
The place that I've ended up in is that I want to be as truthful as possible, even if it's against my own self-interest.
That's a very cool place to be.
And sometimes you know how you can massage your analysis to meet your worldview?
Sure.
I'll give you an example. Like my analysis on the Iran war, which I've just obsessed over for whatever reason. Because I 3 years ago, I said I want to figure out why all these wars happened. And that became my obsession for 3 years. And then I wanted to test it in real time with the Iran war and figure out how much I could predict what might happen based upon my understanding. Yeah. What my analysis on the Iran war pisses off everybody. It pisses off the people that are fans of Iran, the people that think that The resistance is the moral position. It pisses off. Sometimes I can't tell you how much I despise everything about Israel. That's what radicalized me. I watched every day of the genocide.
Israel or the Israeli government?
The Israeli government and the indoctrination of the people, that I believe this is where you get one of those unpopular narratives. Because really, they radicalized the Jews that came to Israel. And they are victims of their own indoctrination that was used in order to recruit them to the IDF. And what happened to Jewish people in their history. That's really unpopular if you talk about things like that. Because then someone wants to immediately say, oh, you're a Zionist shill. I'm like, there's nothing you could say that's more offensive to me than that. You know what I mean? Because I watched this in 4K every day. But then sometimes it's true. That could be true. Like, for example, what happened to Iran by the British and American Empire is evil. But what Iran has also done in reaction to that has caused a lot of problems in the region.
But people are always forced to pick a side. It's a bit like this Gad Saad episode with Rogan. It's a car crash, right?
Yeah.
And I like Gad Saad. I want to read the book, Suicidal Empathy. It's an interesting concept. I like Rogan. I watched a lot of his shows, but I watched this one and it was horrible. It was a car crash of rationalization and gaslighting from Gad Saad because he has to pick a side. Now, does he have to pick a side because he's been indoctrinated? I mean, he's not Israeli, he's Lebanese, right? I think he's Lebanese. Or does he have to pick a side because he's worried about being cancelled? Criticism, like I've got tweets going back 5-6 years saying free Gaza. You know, not popular in some areas. But I was just always of the view, like, both sides just stop killing each other. Maybe I'm very naive. And look, they're just outside of the terrorists and the IDF, there are a bunch of people who are just getting killed. Just can we stop killing each other, please? And I always felt like what's happened to the Palestinians was kind of gross. They were living in a prison state. And I watched an excellent documentary on how terrible life is, and I've seen the pictures before and after the war. Like, it's just, so I'd put out Free Gaza, and I would be told, you're anti-Semitic, this and that, and you shouldn't say this, and it's like, really? I can't just say these people should be free? Yeah. And so, I wonder if people just, I wonder if Gad Saad, does he feel trapped? Does he believe it? I don't know. It's just, the Overton window certainly shifted.
See, that's the thing. So many things can be true, right? So I tried to say what happened to Iran is evil. What Iran did in certain reactions is evil.
Right, you didn't pick a side.
Is it true? And again, this is how I analyze in my mind right now. Is it true that once the genocide happened, that there could be an agenda to weaponize the genocide in order to make Israel look even worse than it may be?
And I think you can pick a starting point in history and create whatever narrative you want from that point, or go back one step and say, did this happen for this? Or go back one step, oh, but did this happen for that? Like, I think you can create a narrative for everything. And it's just, I sometimes just like, can we just stop fucking doing this?
Yeah.
Like, I'm so over it.
Exactly.
You know, can we just stop killing people?
But even here's what I've found. I've always found that I come up with a realization that I didn't, and I try and share that. And historically, when I'm right, I'm not always right. That's not what I'm saying. But when I am right, it's normally 2 years ahead, and then it becomes obvious in 2 years. And then it becomes popular to say the thing that was so unpopular back then. So I talked out about, that I believed that there was no, I won't say the word, but October the 7th didn't have anything that was reported. Gave all the evidence, and that was right at the beginning. That's quite a popular narrative now. So 2 years later, you can say that, and it's pretty popular. Today, I like to say that, so most people have now come, okay, Israel rules the world. They're the ultimate. Netanyahu owns everything. And this whole war is for him. That's not true. Israel and Netanyahu have their own deep state, and they have their own lobbies. And when you really follow the money, everything Israel does brings money back to the US stock market when you really follow it. Now, that's a very unpopular message right now because now all the podcasters are popularized. America, if it were not for Israel and Zionists, we're a very ethical country, and we were forced into this. We had to be blackmailed by Jeffrey Epstein. And it's very unpopular now to actually show the real flow of money and how it comes back and how this is propping up empire, because then they're like, oh, you're apologizing for the Zionists. You think that you're forgiving Israel for what they did. No. What Israel did involves doctrination. It was fundamentally evil, but whose interests were they serving and whose? So I've hit a place where I don't give a damn what anyone says anymore. Every opinion, you'll tell me that, and all I want to do is just be consistent and tell people, this is what I think's happening. This is what I think will happen. And by the way, this is what I got wrong, and this is why I thought I got it wrong. And this is what I got right. And love it or hate it, I am who I am, and I don't give a shit anymore.
Well, look, it's something's working. You're becoming quite popular. You're getting invited on bigger and bigger shows. The shows you do have lots of downloads. The one we first did is nearly at 1 million. That's a massive show. It's like top 5 show for us of all time. I've seen you getting invited on other shows. You've become that banker. Oh yeah, we get Simon on. We're going to get, but you're becoming popular because you're saying something different as well, and you're doing it from a position of honesty. Simon, man, I love talking to you. Yeah, we do this every week with you. Going to get in the car now with Connor and I'll have to fill him in. How much of it did you hear, Con? Do you have any questions for Simon? Do you want to end on something big?
If you were to speak to the young, looking at the big world and the adulthood that they are about to step into, how do they navigate this world without becoming consumed by it?
Yeah, I'd say I think I'm at the stage right now where I think that university or college is an absolute waste of time and the worst decision you could ever make.
Hallelujah.
I think that spending 3 years like being indoctrinated to get a job is a really bad idea. So I think you just need to recognize that there's probably only 2 things that you need to know in this economy. One is that you need to own assets that beat the game. So whatever you've got left over can't be held in cash. It needs to be held in assets. And the other is the entire chessboard has been flipped up for AI and robotics. And so you either you're building shit with your hands for that infrastructure, or you're building software, you're leaning in, you're helping businesses. Every single business in the world right now needs a young kid that can help them figure out how to transition to AI. So just bring in as much money as you can, learn on the move. Like this is lean into it, bring in as much money and then save it in an asset that beats the game. And probably none of us know what the world looks like in 5 years. And if you're from a family where the boomer made all the wealth, just hopefully you're in a country and they've got some tax efficiency and structuring where you'll end up with it. So probably everything will be okay anyway.
I'm not a boomer.
And we're not in a tax haven.
No.
to get your dad to start structuring what happens after he dies, before he dies.
Hey.
I think we did the math the other day. I'm left with 25%.
Yeah, once you stake off inheritance and cap gains and everything, it's pretty brutal.
No, here's one more piece of advice. Build your wealth in a different country to the country you live in. So even if most people can't afford to set up Cayman Island structures and all this stuff, but even if it's just learn how to build yourself as a company, and in a company you have to spend less than you earn and you have to invest the difference and put it to work. But I do recommend everyone starts looking at even if your business is just AI consulting, just structure it as a business. Just because you're in the UK, don't set it up as a UK company. Like set it up as a UAE company or a Singapore, whatever you can afford at your stage, and start running yourself as a business.
Simon, man, we can do this as often as you like. I will have you here whenever you want. We should probably hang out and get dinner sometime as well.
Yeah, let's do it. Thanks for having me.
Dude, keep crushing, keep being successful, keep spreading the message. Me and Connor have a long chat on the way home and see where we end up. Take the golden pill. Thank you everyone for listening. We'll see you all soon.
Yeah, take the golden pill.